See, Silas Crowder grabbed her by the hair in front of the entire town, dragged her through the mud like she was livestock he owned, and told every soul watching that a woman who refused him deserved exactly what was coming to her. See, nobody moved, nobody said a word, because in Red Hollow, Montana, Silas Crowder was the law. See, Eliza Varden had two choices that night: submit to a man who terrified her, or run into a winter that would kill her just as surely, only slower and colder and completely alone. See, she ran. What happened next? The frozen mountains, the scarred stranger, the impossible bargain, struck in the dark, would change everything she thought she knew about survival, about men, and about what it truly means to finally belong somewhere. See, if this story grips you the way it gripped me, hit that subscribe button right now, drop a like, and leave a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. See, I want to see exactly how far Eliza's story has traveled. See, and stay with me until the very end, because what comes next will shake you to your core. See, the night Silas Crowder decided to make an example of Eliza Varden, the temperature in Red Hollow had already dropped below zero. See, she heard him coming before she saw him, heavy boots on frozen ground. See, the particular kind of footfall that belongs to a man who has never once in his life been told no and believed it. See, Eliza was behind the general store, pulling her coat tighter around herself, breath coming out in pale clouds that vanished into the dark air above her head. See, she had been hiding there for 20 minutes, waiting for the street to clear. See, waiting for the right moment to move without being seen. See, she didn't get it. The back door of the store swung open hard enough to bang against the outside wall, and Silas filled the frame like something carved out of threat. See, he was a big man, broad shoulders, thick neck, the kind of physical presence that made other men step back and women look for exits. See, he had a red beard going gray at the edges and pale eyes that seemed to reflect light even when there wasn't much of it. See, he looked at her the way a man looks at something he already considers his. See, there you are, he said. Not loud. He never needed to be loud. See, Eliza pressed her back against the cold wood of the store wall. See, I'm not going with you, Silas. He came down the 2 steps slowly, like he had all the time in the world. See, you said that last Tuesday, and the Tuesday before that. He tilted his head. See, you notice how you keep saying it and it keeps not mattering. See, I mean it this time. You meant it last time too. See, she tried to move left. He shifted his weight and blocked her without breaking stride, the way you'd turn a calf back toward the pen, barely thinking about it. See, that casual certainty in how he moved like she was already accounted for made something cold and deep open up in her stomach. See, not just fear, something older than fear, something closer to the understanding that a person has no value here. See, that she could scream until her throat gave out, and the town would find reasons to look the other way. See, she had already screamed once before. See, 2 months ago, when he'd grabbed her arm outside the church after the Sunday service and told her, in front of Pastor Hennessy and half the congregation, that she would make a fine wife and ought to stop pretending otherwise. See, she had told him very clearly and loudly what she thought of that idea. See, Pastor Hennessy had cleared his throat and found something interesting to study on the horizon. See, so Eliza didn't scream now. She did something smarter. See, she ran. She got maybe 12 feet before his hand caught the back of her coat. See, she twisted hard, heard a seam pop, got free of his grip, but not the coat itself, and then she was stumbling forward in just her dress and her boots with the cracked sole on the left side. See, and she could hear him behind her breathing steady and unhurried, because he knew that Red Hollow had nowhere for her to go. See, Main Street was lit by oil lamps, orange pools of light on the frozen ground between patches of dark. See, there were people out, a couple of men talking in front of the saloon. See, old Crawford sweeping snow off his porch. A woman Eliza half recognized from the milliner's shop, pulling a child along behind her. See, Eliza ran toward them, toward the light and the witnesses. See, Silas caught her by the hair. It happened fast and hard and without any kind of mercy. See, his fingers closed around the bundle of dark hair at the back of her head, and he yanked. See, and her feet went out from under her on the ice, and she came down sideways onto the frozen ground with a crack that sent pain shooting through her hip and shoulder. See, she made a sound she couldn't control, short and sharp. See, involuntary. And then she was on her knees in the mud and ice on the main street of Red Hollow with Silas Crowder standing over her and everyone who mattered to her survival, standing in a loose ring 10 feet back, watching. See, nobody moved. Crawford stopped sweeping. The two men in front of the saloon had gone very still. See, the woman from the milliner's pulled her child close and turned the child's face away, but she herself kept looking. See, they all kept looking. Silas spoke loud enough for every one of them to hear. See, this woman is going to be my wife. She's been running her mouth for 2 months telling herself otherwise. See, I'm done being patient about it. Eliza pushed herself up onto her hands, hair loose around her face, hands shaking. See, I'd rather freeze to death in the mountains. That can be arranged. See, he didn't say it like a threat. He said it like a solution he'd already considered and discarded because it was wasteful. See, like she was a resource he wasn't willing to lose. See, Eliza looked up at the circle of watching faces. She had lived in Red Hollow for 3 years. See, she had helped set broken arms and talked frightened mothers through difficult births and sat up through long nights with people who were sick and scared. See, she knew most of these faces by name. Not one of them stepped forward. See, she stood up on her own. See, her hip ached and her hands were bleeding at the palms where she'd hit the ground, and she stood up straight and looked to Silas Crowder directly in his pale eyes and said very quietly, so only he could hear it, "Then I choose the mountains." See, she saw something move behind his eyes. Surprise, maybe. See, or maybe just recalculation. Either way, she was already turning. See, already walking. She crossed the circle of witnesses without looking at any of them, went past the edge of the lamplight, and kept going into the dark. See, behind her, she heard Silas say something to the crowd. See, she didn't catch the words. She didn't want them. She just kept walking. See, the cold hit her properly once she passed the last building on the north end of town. See, until then, the structures had been blocking some of the wind, and she'd had the warmth of moving your fast and the hot electric thing that lives in your chest when you're terrified and running on pure decision. See, once there were no more buildings, the wind found her completely. See, it came down off the mountain wall to the northwest like something alive and deliberate, and within 3 minutes, she couldn't feel her ears. See, she had no coat. She had cracked boots. She had the dress she'd been wearing since morning, a cotton underskirt, and a pair of wool stockings that had seen better winters. See, she had in her pockets 12 cents, a folded letter from her cousin in Billings that she'd been carrying for 2 weeks, meaning to reply to. See, and a small folding knife that she'd taken to keeping on her person ever since Silas Crowder had started making his intentions clear. See, that was the full inventory of Eliza Varden. She followed the North Trail by moonlight for the first hour, moving fast enough to keep blood in her feet. See, she knew this stretch of trail well enough. She'd walked it in daylight plenty of times, gathering plants in the warmer months, bringing supplies to the Whitfield family, who lived 1.5 miles up the slope. See, but the Whitfields had packed out before the first real snow, gone to winter with family in Bozeman, and their cabin sat empty and cold and wouldn't shelter her even if she made it there, which she might. See, she made it there. The Whitfield cabin was locked and dark, and the temperature inside wasn't much better than outside. See, but it had 4 walls and a roof and a stack of dry wood someone had left against the interior wall. See, she worked her fingers until she could grip things again and built a fire in the small iron stove and sat on the floor in front of it with her knees pulled to her chest, shaking hard. See, she thought about going back. She thought about it seriously, not as a fantasy, but as an actual option she was weighing. See, she could go back and tell Silas she had reconsidered. See, she could let herself be folded into that life, become his wife in name, and in fact, run his household, bear whatever came after that. See, she knew women who had made exactly that bargain, in Red Hollow and everywhere else she'd ever lived. See, women who had decided that the alternative was worse. See, was it worse? She was sitting on a frozen floor in an abandoned cabin with bleeding palms and no coat. See, she fed the fire another piece of wood and told herself to think clearly. See, going back meant Silas. Going back meant a life built entirely inside the dimensions that man would allow her. See, and Silas Crowder was not a man who allowed much. She had watched him closely enough over the past months to understand that. See, she had seen how his employees moved around him, not comfortably, not even respectfully, but carefully. See, the way you move around something unpredictable, he wasn't just powerful. See, he was the kind of powerful that had never been checked and that had done something to him over the years. See, filed something down, made him into a man who genuinely didn't understand why anyone would refuse him anything. See, going back to that permanently, legally, with no exit was not a choice. See, it was a surrender. She stayed at the Whitfield cabin until the fire burned down, slept fitfully on the floor, and was walking again before full light. See, the storm found her on the second day. See, she had made it farther into the mountains than she expected. See, higher too, following what she thought was a maintained trail and discovering too late that she'd misread a fork in the path. See, by the time the sky started doing the particular thing it does before a serious snowstorm, that flat white, see, suffocating quality where the light seems to come from everywhere and nowhere, and the air goes very still right before it goes completely insane, she was committed. See, she couldn't safely descend, and she couldn't stay where she was. See, she pushed forward. The snow started. It started as the light kind, the decorative kind, the kind that sits gently on branches and makes everything look like the picture on a Christmas card. See, within an hour, it was none of those things. See, the wind came back, harder than before, driving snow horizontally into her face, filling her cracked left boot with cold so complete it stopped feeling like cold and started feeling like nothing at all, which was worse. See, she fell twice. The second time she stayed down for a long moment, cheek against the snow, feeling the particular seductive pull of exhaustion that every person who has ever been truly cold has felt. See, the warmth that isn't warmth, the whisper in your body that says just stop. See, just stop fighting this. It would be easier. She recognized it for what it was and pushed herself up anyway, but the getting up was harder than it had been. See, by the third day, she was operating on something below reason. See, a kind of animal forward motion, one foot, then the other. See, don't stop. Don't lie down. The cold had reorganized her body's priorities. See, her feet were beyond pain. Her hands worked badly. See, the 12 cents and the letter and the folding knife were still in her pockets, and they might as well have been rocks. See, she smelled the wood smoke before she saw the light. See, even half delirious with cold, she registered it. Real wood smoke from a real fire not far. See, she turned toward it, and the turning felt like a miracle, even as she was doing it, even as part of her brain, the part that was still fully working, said cautiously, "You don't know who lives here. See, you don't know anything about this." She didn't have enough left in her to be cautious. See, the cabin appeared out of the storm like a thing that didn't quite believe in itself. See, dark and low and solid, with orange light leaking around the shuttered windows. See, enormous. Whoever had built this hadn't been thinking about decoration. See, it was a practical structure, built by someone who understood that winters up here were not decorative. See, she made it to the door. She knocked, or tried to. See, her knuckles barely made sound. She knocked harder, using the heel of her hand, and then she was sliding down the door, because her legs had made a unilateral decision, and she was on the porch on her knees, and then her side. See, and the cold of the porch boards was nothing compared to the cold she'd been carrying for 3 days, and she thought distantly, with something like dark humor, well, see, you got this door opened. He was huge. That was the first thing she registered, not a face, not features, just scale. See, a man built like the mountains had made him, filling the doorframe completely, one massive hand on the doorframe and the other holding an oil lamp that threw warm gold light across the porch. See, she had a vague impression of a beard, of dark eyes catching the light, of scars she couldn't fully make out. See, he looked down at her with an expression she couldn't read, because her eyes weren't working right anymore. See, please, she said. She didn't know exactly what she was asking for. See, just the general concept. Please, something, anything. See, he stared at her for a long moment in the doorway of his mountain cabin in the middle of a killing storm. See, whatever was happening behind those dark eyes, she couldn't access it. See, she had nothing left with which to access anything. See, how far did you walk, he asked. 3 days. The words came out wrong. See, slurred. Maybe more. She stopped, please. See, another long moment, wind screaming around the corner of the cabin. See, the lamp flame bending sideways. Then Gideon Rourke stepped back from the door and left it open, which was the only invitation he was going to offer. See, Eliza Varden crawled inside. He did not ask her name right away. See, he put the lamp down on the table in the center of the single large room and went to the fire and added wood and didn't speak. See, she lay on the floor near the heat and tried to remember how to feel her feet. See, the answer was that feeling was coming back into her feet, and it was not a comfortable process. See, it was the particular returning agony of frozen flesh warming too fast, and she pressed her lips together and didn't make noise, though it cost her something. See, he brought her a tin mug of something hot. She wrapped her hands around it and discovered her hands were shaking badly enough to slosh liquid over the rim. See, careful, he said. Just the one word. She steadied the mug against her knees and drank. See, broth, some kind, heavily salted, so hot it burned her throat on the way down. See, she drank all of it without stopping. He stood a few feet away, watching her with his arms crossed and his face doing nothing in particular. See, up close the scars were more visible. One ran from his left ear down to the jaw. See, another cut diagonally across his nose. His hands, when he'd carried the mug, had old scarring across the knuckles that spoke to either a profession or a history she wasn't in a position to ask about yet. See, you came from down the mountain, he said, not a question. See, Red Hollow. Long walk, yes. Nobody chases a woman in a dress 3 days into a Montana winter in February unless the alternative is worse, he said. See, so I won't ask what the alternative was. She looked up at him. See, thank you. He nodded. Once, short. You can stay until the storm breaks, he said. See, then you'll need to go, she almost laughed. Go where, exactly? See, but she didn't say it. She just nodded and held her mug and let the fire do its work on the cold she'd been carrying for 3 days. See, his name, she learned later that evening, was Gideon Rourke. See, he had been on this mountain for 7 years. He didn't offer those facts easily. They came out of the quiet in pieces, the way information emerges when two people are confined by weather with nothing to do but eventually speak. See, she told him her name. She didn't tell him about Silas. See, not yet. That night the temperature dropped. She had thought it was already as cold as it got. See, she was wrong. The fire in the hearth fought valiantly and lost ground steadily, and by the deep hours of the night she was lying on the cabin floor wrapped in the blanket he'd given her and shaking again. See, this time not from wet and exhaustion, but just from pure cold seeping up through the floorboards. See, she could feel it in her bones, could feel her body working to maintain its own heat and beginning to lose that argument. See, she lay there for a long time telling herself it was fine. See, it wasn't fine. She sat up and looked at the bed on the far side of the room, where Gideon lay still under a pile of furs, apparently asleep. See, the bed was built into the wall in the old style, and the furs were piled thick. See, she looked at it for a while. She stood up, crossed the room. See, stood at the edge of the bed. She didn't know what she expected. See, maybe that he was asleep and wouldn't notice. But his eyes opened before she was close enough to touch the frame, and he looked at her in the dim light of the dying fire with the calm of a man who rarely slept deeply and never fully. See, cold, she said, one word, an explanation and a question at once. See, he looked at her for a long moment. Then he said it not gently, not harshly, but the way a man states terms he's already thought through. You sleep in my bed. You wake up as my wife. See, the words dropped into the space between them and lay there. See, she stared at him, tried to find the manipulation in it. See, Tried to locate the Silas in it, the domination dressed up as offer, the trap with a friendly door. See, but Gideon Rourke's face in the firelight was not Silas Crowder's face. See, there was no smirk in it, no pleasure in her confusion. See, just a man who meant exactly what he said and had apparently decided that this was the only version of this situation he was willing to be part of. See, why, she asked. Because that's the only kind of woman who sleeps in my bed, he said. See, wouldn't be right otherwise. She almost said a dozen things. See, she almost said, I don't know you. She almost said, you don't know me either. See, she almost said, this is insane. All of those things were true. See, she also had frostbitten feet and 3 days of wilderness behind her and a town full of people who had watched her get dragged through the street and done nothing, and she was so cold she could feel it in the back of her teeth. See, she had spent her whole life running. From a father who drank badly, from towns that didn't pan out, from one situation after another that had promised shelter and delivered something else. See, she was 24 years old, and she was so tired of running that the tiredness had its own weight, heavier than the cold. See, all right, she said. She said it plainly, without drama. See, not because she had stopped being afraid, but because she had decided. See, and Eliza Varden, whatever else she was, had always been someone who made decisions and lived inside them without flinching. See, she climbed into the bed. He moved over to give her room. See, he did not reach for her. He put his back to the wall and pulled his portion of the furs over himself and said nothing else. See, she lay in the warmth, real warmth, the deep kind, the kind that comes from thick furs and an enclosed space and another person's body heat, and stared at the dark ceiling, and listened to the storm hammer the mountain outside, and thought, all right. See, so this is what you chose. Now figure out what it means. See, she was asleep before she finished the thought. Outside, the wind screamed. See, the fire burned low. The mountain held them both in the dark, indifferent as it always was waiting, the way mountains always wait, to see what the small warm things inside them were made of. See, she woke up alone in the bed, not startled, not afraid, just aware, in the slow way of someone whose body has finally caught up on a debt it had been running from for 3 days. See, the furs were still warm where she lay. The fire was going again, built up sometime before dawn, which meant he had been up before her and had done it quietly enough that she hadn't stirred. See, she registered that without knowing quite what to do with it. See, Gideon was at the table, eating. He had a bowl of something in front of him and a cup of coffee, and he was looking out the narrow window at the white wall of the continuing storm. See, he didn't look up when she sat. She pushed the furs back and swung her legs over the side of the bed and immediately regretted it. See, her feet announced themselves. Whatever the frostbite had done and not done, she'd gotten lucky. She understood that a few more hours outside would have cost her toes, or worse, the damage that remained was enough to make standing a negotiation. See, she stood anyway, slowly, and made her way to the table. See, he pushed the coffee pot toward her without being asked. See, she poured herself a cup and sat across from him, and they ate without speaking for a while. See, the storm outside was doing enough talking for everyone. See, it threw itself at the shuttered windows in irregular waves, and occasionally something a branch, loose ice, struck the roof, and the whole structure shivered slightly, and then went still. See, your feet, he said eventually. I'll live. I know you'll live. See, I'm asking how bad. She looked at him over the cup. See, not as bad as they could be. The toes on the left foot are the worst. See, the boot had a crack in the sole. She paused. I can walk. See, not today, you can't. She opened her mouth to argue, and he looked at her, just looked, no particular expression, and she closed it again. See, not because she was intimidated, because he was right, and she knew it, and arguing with correct information was something she'd gotten out of the habit of doing years ago. See, fine, she said, not today. He went back to his bowl. See, she drank her coffee. Outside, the wind made a sound like something being torn open. See, it took her until mid-morning to understand that he wasn't going to revisit what had been said the night before. See, not yet, possibly not ever, unless she brought it up herself. See, Gideon Rourke operated with an economy of language that she found alternately refreshing and unnerving. See, he said things when he had something to say. He did not fill silence with noise. See, she had spent enough of her life around men who talked to hear themselves that this was unusual enough to notice. See, she noticed other things too, because she was in a small space with nowhere to go and nothing to do but pay attention. See, he moved carefully for a man his size. Not delicately, nothing about him was delicate, but with a precision that suggested he was always aware of how much space he occupied and what was near him. See, he kept his tools in specific places and returned them to those places without thinking about it. See, the cabin, which had looked merely large and functional on the outside, was internally arranged with a logic she started to map over the course of the morning. See, every item had a purpose. Nothing was decorative except for a single dry wildflower stem tucked into a crack in the log wall near the window, brown and fragile and long dead, which seemed to have been there so long it had become invisible to him. See, she didn't ask about the flower. By afternoon, her feet had improved enough that she could move around the cabin without her face giving anything away. See, she found the bucket near the back wall and the pitcher beside the wash basin, and cleaned herself up as best she could, keeping her back to the room. See, he didn't look. She believed the not looking was genuine rather than performed, which was its own kind of relief. See, I need to tell you something, she said when she was done. See, he was near the fire, mending a piece of harness leather. See, he didn't stop working. All right, the man I left in Red Hollow. See, he's not the kind who accepts it when something he considers his goes somewhere else. See, the needle kept moving through the leather. How many men does he have? See, she blinked. She had expected more preliminary questions. Who is he? What do you mean? How sure are you? See, not straight to operational assessment. He has money, she said. See, he can hire. Gideon set the harness across his knee. See, you have a name? Silas Crowder. Something crossed his face. See, not recognition exactly, more like the confirmation of a suspicion. See, I've heard that name. Traitor, among other things. See, men like that don't hike into mountain winters themselves. See, they send people. He picked the harness back up. Storm will keep them down for now. See, when it breaks, we'll see. We'll see. Not you'll need to worry about that. See, not that's your problem. He had said we without apparently noticing that he'd done it. See, Eliza filed that away and said nothing. That night was easier than the first. See, she took the bed without discussion because apparently discussion wasn't required. See, he took his side and she took hers, and the furs were warm and she lay in the dark, listening to him breathe slow, and even the breathing of a man who had made his peace with where he was, and she thought about what she had agreed to. See, wife. The word was large and complicated, and she had never wanted it under circumstances that felt anything like these, and she still wasn't entirely sure what she'd said yes to. See, but she thought about Silas, about the way his hand had felt in her hair. See, about the ring of faces watching and doing nothing. See, and she thought about this man beside her who had given her hot broth and a blanket and hadn't asked for anything in the night, hadn't touched her, hadn't made the silence into something she had to navigate carefully. See, she had known worse. She had known much, much worse. See, she slept. The storm broke on the fourth morning. See, not gently. See, it didn't taper off, it simply stopped. The way hard things sometimes stop, all at once, leaving a silence so complete after all that noise that Eliza stood at the window and just listened to nothing for a full minute before she could process it. See, the world outside was white and enormous and still. See, the trees were buried to their lower branches. The sky was the particular blue that only exists after a heavy mountain storm, so clear and cold it almost looked artificial. See, Gideon was already in his coat. Where are you going? She asked. See, traps. He was pulling on his gloves, heavy things, wool inside, leather outside. See, I've got a line running northeast, missed 3 days. See, whatever's in them now is probably not worth pulling. See, how long? Few hours. He looked at her. Can you fire a rifle? See, she hadn't expected the question. Yes, my father, she stopped, started over. See, Yes, I can fire a rifle. He took the one down from its place near the door and set it on the table. See, not the shotgun she'd noticed earlier, which remained in its rack. See, the rifle was a lever-action Winchester, worn to a shine on the stock from long handling. See, it's loaded, he said. If anyone comes up the path before I'm back, don't go to the window. See, stay low and use the left side of the door frame. The angle's better. See, she looked at the rifle and then at him. You're serious. See, I'm always serious. You barely know me. I know you walked 3 days in February in a dress, he said. See, that tells me enough about your judgment to leave you with a loaded rifle. See, then he went out. She stood in the cabin alone with the Winchester on the table and the enormous silence outside and tried to decide how she felt about any of this. See, she couldn't quite land on a single feeling. There were too many of them, overlapping, none of them fitting neatly inside a word. See, she cleaned the cabin instead. Not because it needed it desperately, he kept it reasonably. See, in the functional way, a solitary person keeps a space when they've lived in it long enough to have systems, but because she needed to do something with her hands and her body and the restless energy that had. See, nowhere to go on a mountain in 2 feet of new snow. See, she found while cleaning small evidences of the life he'd built up here. See, a battered almanac from 5 years back, well thumbed. See, a wooden box under the bed, containing letters she didn't open the box and only registered the letters from the slight overlap of paper she could see at the corner. See, a row of glass jars containing dried herbs and roots she mostly recognized from her own practical knowledge of what was useful in the mountains. See, he wasn't just surviving up here. He'd been building something, slowly, over years, in the methodical way of a man who had decided that this was where he was going to be and had gotten on with it. See, she was thinking about that when she heard the horse. See, one horse, moving slow on the new snow, coming up the trail from the south. See, she moved away from the window, without full thinking, the way he'd told her, and she had the Winchester in her hands. Before she consciously decided to pick it up, and she positioned herself at the left side of the door frame and waited. See, the knock when it came was 2 slow raps. Pause. See, 3 fast. She opened the door with the rifle ready. See, the man on the porch had his hands up before the door was fully open. See, he was middle-aged, weathered, wearing a heavy coat she didn't recognize. See, he looked at the rifle and then at her face and said, with remarkable calm, "You'd be the woman who came up the mountain." See, depends on who's asking. Name's Aldous Briggs. I run the supply post at the lower trail fork. See, Gideon buys from me every 6 weeks or so. He kept his hands where they were. See, I'm not with Crowder. I want to be clear about that up front, because you look like a woman who's about to make a permanent decision with that rifle, and I'd rather not be on the wrong side of it. See, she looked at him for a long moment. Then she stepped back from the door. See, come in. He came in, and she put the rifle down but kept it close, and he sat at the table and accepted coffee when she offered it and got to the point without a lot of wasted breath, which she appreciated. See, Crowder sent 2 men up behind the storm, he said. See, I saw them at the fork this morning. They weren't trying to hide what they were doing. Big coats, sidearms, riding like they owned the mountain. See, asked me whether Gideon Rourke had any company lately. He wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. See, I told them I hadn't been up his way in weeks. Why? See, he considered the question. Because I've known Gideon Rourke for 6 years, and he's a straight dealer, and I don't like Silas Crowder. He said it simply, without inflation. See, that's the whole reason. Eliza sat down across from him. See, how far behind are they? Hour, maybe less. I came ahead as fast as I could push the horse through this snow. See, an hour, maybe less. She stood up. See, she went to the rifle and checked the load already loaded, as Gideon had said, but she verified it with her own hands because that was what you did, and then she looked around the cabin with new eyes, calculating. See, there's another position on the east side of the cabin, Aldous said, watching her. See, behind the wood stack. He keeps a cache of ammunition in the storage box on the north wall. See, second shelf left side. He paused. He showed me around. See, neighborly sort in his way. Eliza almost smiled. See, you know this mountain. Well enough. Can you stay? See, Aldous looked at his coffee. My wife would tell me to turn around and ride back down and mind my own business. See, would you listen to her? Probably not, no. He set the cup down. See, tell me what you need. See, Gideon came back to find a horse tied to the post he'd put in for the purpose years ago, and a man he recognized sitting on the porch with a rifle across his knees, and a woman who should not have been able to move well on frostbitten feet standing. See, inside the door with the Winchester, and a look on her face that he had not seen before and could not immediately name. See, he named it later. Thinking back, it was readiness. See, not aggression, not fear, but the particular expression of a person who has decided what they are willing to do and has stopped arguing with themselves about it. See, he looked at Aldous. Briggs, Gideon. 2 men, Eliza said from inside. See, about an hour behind him, Crowder's. He absorbed this. See, came inside, set down the 2 animals he'd pulled from the trapline marten, both of them, barely worth the trouble after 3 days, and turned to face her. See, you moved the table, he said. She had moved the table. See, angled it so the top provided some cover from the window. See, the angle was wrong the way you had it. He looked at the table. See, looked at her. He went to the storage box on the north wall, second shelf, left side, and pulled out the ammunition cache. See, he glanced at Aldous. She find this herself? I may have mentioned it, Aldous said. See, Gideon loaded the shotgun from the rack and tucked additional shells into his coat pocket and moved to the window to look out at the trail coming up from the south. See, the snow was clear. The trees were bare. Whoever was coming, they'd have no cover on the last 100 yards of approach. See, neither would anyone at the cabin, which was the problem. See, there's a position behind the elk hides on the east wall, he said. See, not to either of them specifically, just laying it out. See, second floor if they come around the back. I need someone on the west side, the snow's deeper over there. They'll move slower, but it's a blind spot from the front. See, I'll take the west, Aldous said. You don't have to do this, Gideon told him. See, I know. Aldous stood up from the porch. Where do you want the woman? See, I'm standing right here, Eliza said. The door, Gideon said. See, he said it to her directly, which she appreciated. See, not like she wasn't in the room, same position you had. See, you're good there, and you've already worked out the angle. He paused, and something in his face shifted very briefly, almost too briefly to catch. See, you said you can fire a rifle. I said that. There's a difference between knowing you can and having to. See, she met his eyes. I know which side of that line I'm on. See, he nodded, once. The same way he'd nodded the first night, when she'd thanked him for the broth. See, like he'd heard her and believed her and had moved on to the next thing. See, they waited. The 2 men came up the trail at a walk, which suggested they weren't expecting a fight. See, they were dressed for the cold, long coats, hats pulled down, and they moved with the particular loose-shouldered ease of men who were accustomed to arriving places and having that arrival be sufficient. See, they stopped at the edge of the clearing and looked at the cabin. See, Rourke, one of them called out, loud voice carrying easily across the new snow. See, we're not here to make trouble. We're here for the woman. See, hand her over and we ride out clean. Gideon stepped out onto the porch. See, not aggressively, not with the shotgun raised. Just stepped out and stood there and said, there's no runaway woman here. See, a pause. Crowder says different. Crowder's down the mountain. He let that sit for a moment. See, what's up here is my wife. You'd like to check. You're welcome to ride back down and send a letter to the territorial magistrate asking him to investigate. See, that'll take a few months. Meanwhile, good winter to you both. See, he turned to go back inside. The shot came fast. Without warning, one of them pulled a revolver and fired before Gideon had fully turned, and the bullet clipped the doorframe 6 inches from his head and sent splinters spraying into the cold air. See, and Gideon dropped flat and rolled left and came up with the shotgun in one motion that was fast enough to be alarming for a man his size. See, what happened next happened in pieces. Both men scattered, one behind his horse, one to the right toward a stand of trees. See, Gideon fired once, and the man behind the horse went down clutching his leg, not dead but done, screaming into the snow. Aldous came around the west side of the cabin, and his rifle cracked, and the horse that had been providing cover bolted, and suddenly the man who'd been behind it had nothing between himself and open ground. The second man circled, moving fast through the snow toward the blind side of the cabin, angling behind Gideon's position. And Eliza saw it from the door and understood, before the thought was fully formed, that he was trying to get behind her husband, and that Gideon couldn't see him from where he was, and Aldous was around the corner and couldn't see it either. She raised the Winchester. Her hands were steady. She had not expected them to be steady, and they were, and she registered that fact somewhere beneath the noise and the cold and the screaming from the man Gideon had shot, and she found the moving figure in the sights, and she fired. The sound was enormous. The recoil hit her shoulder hard. The man in the snow stumbled and went down on one knee and dropped his revolver and put both hands to his side, and he was still alive, but he was no longer moving toward Gideon's back. Silence came down like something dropped. Gideon turned and looked at where the second man was kneeling in the snow, and then turned further and looked at Eliza standing in the door with the Winchester, and a thin curl of smoke rising from the barrel. He looked at her for a long moment. He didn't say anything. But something moved in his face that hadn't been there before, not surprise exactly, more like a recalibration. A man who has made a judgment and just had it confirmed in the harshest possible way. Aldous came around the corner, rifle ready, taking in the scene. The first man was alive and making it known. The second was sitting in the snow, hand pressed to his side, staring at Eliza with an expression that was some combination of pain and profound reevaluation. We need to move them, Aldous said. Practical, immediate, no wasted breath. Woodshed, Gideon said. They moved both wounded men to the woodshed, which was large enough and warmer than outside, and would keep them alive long enough to be someone else's problem. Gideon bound their wounds with competence and no particular gentleness, and neither man was in a position to object to anything. The one who'd circled the one Eliza had stopped, looked up at her, while Gideon was working on the other man. His name, she found out later, was Cutter. He had a sharp face and eyes that even now, sitting hurt in a woodshed in the middle of a mountain winter, contained more calculation than fear. Crowder's not going to let this go, he said. I know, Eliza said. He'll come himself next time, more men. I know that too. Cutter looked at her, and then past her at the cabin, and then back at her. You're really staying up here? She thought about the question. About the frozen floor and the broth, and the words said in the dark and the morning, with the coffee pot pushed toward her without being asked. She thought about a ring of faces watching and doing nothing. She thought about how her hands had been steady when it mattered. Yes, she said, I'm staying. He said nothing else. Outside, Gideon was talking to Aldous in low tones near the woodshed door. She could catch pieces of it send word. Magistrate. The spring Crowder. Making plans, thinking ahead. She had expected him to be rattled by what had happened, and he wasn't. And she thought about that for a while, about what a man had to have lived through to absorb a gunfight in front of his own home and move immediately to logistics. She didn't know that story yet. She knew there was one. Aldous left as the afternoon light started thinning. He'd come back in 2 days, weather permitting, with supplies and whatever news was moving in the lower valley. He clasped Gideon's hand at the trail and looked at Eliza and said, with the directness of a man who didn't have time or patience for flattery, "You did good." She nodded. She went inside and put more wood on the fire and sat in the chair nearest the heat and stayed there for a long time. The shaking came eventually, not during, never during, but after. Her hands, which had been steady when she needed them to be, were not steady now. She put them flat on her knees and breathed and let the shaking run its course. Gideon came in. He saw her sitting there, and he didn't comment on the shaking, and didn't make a performance of not commenting on it. He went to the stove and started something for supper, some kind of dried meat and root vegetables, nothing elaborate, and let her sit. See. After a while, she said, he said Crowder will come himself. See, probably. More men. Yes. Does that change anything for you? She meant it as a real question. See, not a test, not a provocation. She wanted to know. See, he set a spoon against the pot and turned to look at her. See, no, he said. Does it change anything for you? She thought about the Winchester. See, about the steadiness of her hands, about the word wife said in the dark at the edge of desperation and what it had meant then versus what it was starting to mean now, something different, something she didn't have precise language for yet. See, no, she said. He turned back to the stove. They ate together when the food was ready. See, outside the blue of the afternoon had gone to the dark purple of early mountain evening, and the stars were coming out one at a time through the window, cold and enormous. See, the two wounded men were still in the woodshed. Tomorrow or the day after, they'd need to deal with that situation somehow, send them back down the mountain with whatever message needed sending. See, but that was tomorrow. Tonight, Eliza ate the rough food at the rough table in the firelight of a cabin halfway up a Montana mountain with a man she had known for 5 days and had already chosen. See, and for the first time in longer than she could clearly remember, she was not thinking about what came next. See, she was just here, in this room, in this moment, in this strange and accidental life that had grabbed her by the collar and pulled her somewhere she could not have predicted. See, she had stopped running, not because there was nowhere to run to. See, not because running had stopped being an option. See, but because, for the first time since she was old enough to understand that the world was not designed to be kind to women who ran out of good options, she had found something she wanted to stop running toward. See, Gideon took both bowls to the basin when they were done and washed them in the economical way he washed everything, without wasted motion, and she sat and watched him, and he didn't seem to mind being watched. See, you said 7 years, she said. Up here, about that. See, was there someone before? He was quiet for a moment. See, the washing continued. Yes, she waited. She didn't stay, he said. See, that was all. He didn't look at her while he said it, and he didn't add anything to it. And she didn't push, because some things are whole answers and require nothing from you except to receive them. See, I'm sorry, she said. Long time ago. He put the bowls away and the spoon in its place, and came and sat in the other chair near the fire, and they sat together in the warm and the quiet and the dark that pressed against the windows. See, and it was not comfortable exactly. It was too new and too strange for comfortable, but it was not bad either. See, it was something she had no word for, something that occupied the space where bad used to be and had not yet decided what it wanted to become. See, the fire popped and settled. She reached up and tucked the dry wildflower stem more securely into its crack in the log wall so it wouldn't fall. See, she didn't know why she did it. He noticed and said nothing, but she felt him notice. See, and that, somehow, was enough for one evening. They sent the two men back down the mountain on the third day. See, not because Gideon had gone soft about it. See, because keeping them was a liability and killing them would invite something worse than what was already coming. And Gideon Rourke was many things, but he was not a man who created problems he didn't have to create. See, he packed their wounds properly tighter than strictly comfortable, which may or may not have been intentional, gave them their horses back, and stood at the edge of the clearing while they rode out. See, Cutter was the last to go. See, he sat his horse for a moment at the tree line and looked back at the cabin and at Eliza standing on the porch with her arms crossed and the Winchester leaning against the doorframe beside her. And whatever he saw in that picture, see, he turned his horse and rode without another word. See, Gideon watched until the sound of hooves disappeared entirely. See, they'll tell him everything, Eliza said, when he came back to the porch. See, yes. The position of the cabin, how many we are. See, what we have, yes. He looked at the tree line where the horses had gone. See, that's fine. She looked at him sideways. That's fine? See, Crowder knowing what's up here means Crowder has to decide what it's worth to him. He turned and went inside. See, men like him calculate. They always calculate. Let him calculate. See, she followed him in. And if he calculates that it's worth it, see, then he'll come. He picked up a piece of harness he'd been working on before all of this started, sat down, went back to work. See, like a man who'd said what needed saying and was done with the subject for now. See, we'll deal with that when it's in front of us. See, Eliza stood in the middle of the cabin and watched him stitch leather for a moment, and then she went and sat across from him and picked up the other piece of harness that needed mending and started working on it herself. See, she was not as fast as him and her stitches were not as even, but they were solid, and he looked at her work once and didn't say anything critical, which she took as a reasonable endorsement. See, they worked in silence for a while. "You should teach me to shoot better," she said. See, "You shot fine. I shot adequately. There's a difference." See, he considered that. "There is." He set the harness down. See, "We'll start tomorrow." What followed was not romantic and was not easy, and was, in its own strange way, exactly what both of them needed. See, Gideon woke her before first light every morning, the way he woke himself, no ceremony, no gentleness beyond the absence of cruelty. See, a hand on her shoulder, one firm shake, and he was already dressed and starting the fire by the time she sat up. See, she had never in her life been a morning person, and she did not become one on the mountain. See, she came awake ugly and slow and with opinions about it, and he never once commented on this, which was its own form of decency. See, he taught her the rifle first. Not just how to fire it, she already knew that, but how to know it. See, how to feel when something was off in the mechanism before it became a problem. See, how to clean it properly, completely, every component, until she could do it without looking and in the dark if she had to. See, he was a patient teacher in the way that people who don't use many words tend to be patient teachers. He showed her, watched her do it, corrected what needed correcting without lengthy explanation, and moved on. See, she was a quick study. She had always been a quick study. It was one of the things about herself she was certain of, in the same way she was certain she had brown eyes and a scar on her left elbow from a fall at 12. See, she absorbed what he showed her and improved faster than he seemed to expect. And she caught him noticing this a few times and trying not to show that he'd noticed. See, again he'd say, after she'd hit a target he'd set up in the clearing. See, she'd hit it again. Move to the left. Wind shifted, she'd move left and adjust and hit it again. See, then he'd move the target, or change the distance, or make her do it from a different position, crouched, or on her back, or around the corner of something, because, as he explained once and only once, see, the ground is never level when you actually need it to be. See, she also learned the trap line. He took her out with him on the second week, once her feet had healed enough that walking wasn't negotiation, and she followed his path through the trees, paying attention to everything he pointed out. See, where to read the signs of animal movement in the snow. See, where the natural funnels were that directed animals through specific passes. See, how to set a trap so it was effective without being obvious, and how to check it in a way that didn't contaminate the surrounding area with too much human smell. See, she was less good at this than at the rifle. It required a patience that she was working on, but hadn't fully arrived at. See, Gideon showed her twice how to set a particular trap, and the third time watched her do it incorrectly and said, "You're rushing." See, "I'm cold." "You'll be cold and wrong." She reset the trap. See, it took another 4 minutes. When she was done, he looked at it and said, "Better," which, from him, was the equivalent of someone else throwing a celebration. See, she started to understand the rhythms of how he lived. See, not just the practical schedule of it, but the internal architecture. See, he needed solitude the way other men needed food, not constantly, but regularly, in doses, and when he'd been in company too long, something in him went slightly taut, like a string that's been tuned too high. See, she learned to read this and give him space when he needed it, without making it a thing, without commentary or injury. See, she'd take the rifle and walk the perimeter alone, or she'd sit at the table and work on whatever needed doing, and simply not require him to be present in any particular way. See, and he learned her, too, learned that she slept lightly and woke fast when something was wrong, but could sleep through ordinary noise like wind and settling timber. See, learned that she had a headache most mornings that went away after coffee and was not worth discussing. See, learned that she was more capable than she looked, but that she had limits she sometimes hit without warning, and that when she hit them she went quiet rather than angry, and the quiet needed to run its course before she came back. See, they learned each other the way you learn a place you intend to live, not all at once, not through some single dramatic revelation, but through the accumulation of days and small observations, building a map slowly from the inside out. See, somewhere in the middle of the third week, without either of them marking the moment, the space between them on the bed stopped feeling like a boundary and started feeling like just the way they slept. See, Aldous came back up twice that month, the first time with flour and salt and a side of cured pork from a butcher in Red Hollow he trusted, and the second time with news. See, he came through the door, shaking snow off his coat, and accepted coffee, and sat down at the table and looked at both of them and said, "Crowder's been talking." See, about? Gideon asked. About what he's going to do to the man who stole his woman. Aldous wrapped his hands around the cup. See, he's not calling it what it is. He's not saying he sent 2 armed men up a mountain to drag a woman away against her will. See, he's saying you took something that belonged to him. See, I didn't take anything, Gideon said. She walked here. See, I know that, and you know that. Aldous looked at Eliza. See, half the town knows it too, if they're honest with themselves. See, other half has found a way to believe whatever Silas tells them because it's easier. He paused. See, he's hired 2 more men. I saw them in town. Not locals brought in from somewhere east. See, look like they know what they're doing. The room was quiet for a moment. See, Eliza looked at Gideon. Gideon was looking at the table. See, his face was doing what his face did not nothing, but something internal, something she was learning to read. See, he was calculating the same way he'd said Crowder would calculate, but differently. See, where Crowder calculated to dominate, Gideon calculated to survive, and the results of those 2 kinds of thinking looked different, even when they arrived at the same rough territory. See, when Gideon asked. Spring thaw, Aldous said. That's my guess. See, he's not going to try the winter again. Not after the first time. He looked at Eliza. See, what happened to Cutter and the other one that went around? See, people are talking. Some of them with respect. He paused. See, some of them not. She nodded. What are they saying? See, that you're not what Crowder told them you were. Aldous drank his coffee. See, he told people you were unstable, that you had problems. See, that he was trying to help you and you ran off out of some kind of confusion. He set the cup down carefully. See, Cutter telling people you shot him fairly in an even fight did not help that particular story. See, Eliza felt something move in her chest. Not quite amusement, not quite satisfaction. See, something colder and more complicated. Good, she said. See, the magistrate's office in Billings has had a letter, Aldous said, and now he was looking at both of them. See, from Crowder claiming unlawful taking of property, he stopped. See, Gideon's jaw tightened, just slightly. Property. See, that's the word he used. The word sat in the room, like something that had crawled in without being invited. See, Eliza was aware of it sitting there, and she made a choice not to let it land on her the way Crowder intended it to land. See, she had spent enough of her life letting other people's words define what she was. See, she was done with that particular exercise. He has a letter, she said. See, we have a marriage. Both men looked at her. Is it legal? She asked Gideon directly. See, what we are. Is it recorded anywhere? He was quiet for a moment. See, no, then it needs to be. She looked at Aldous. See, is there a justice of the peace in Red Hollow? There's old Nettles. See, he does it. Mostly drunk, but he does it legal. There's got to be somewhere else. See, Fort Benton, Aldous said. Day's ride in good weather. See, there's a clerk there who does civil registration. See, has the authority. Eliza looked at Gideon. He was watching her with that steady, unreadable expression that she'd spent 3 weeks learning to see beneath. See, what was beneath it now was something she couldn't entirely name, but it was not reluctance. See, before spring, she said. Before spring, he agreed. See, Aldous finished his coffee and looked between them, and decided apparently that some things didn't require comment from him. See, he stood up and put on his coat and took the lamp she offered him for the ride back down and paused at the door. See, one more thing, he said. There's a woman in town. See, name of Clara Marsh, runs the laundry on 2nd Street. See, she's been saying quietly to people she trusts that she saw what happened to you on Main Street. See, that she's willing to say so to anyone official who asks. He looked at Eliza. See, she wanted me to tell you she remembers. Eliza's throat tightened unexpectedly. See, she had not thought about Clara Marsh in weeks. Clara Marsh, who had been standing in the lamplight on Main Street with her child, pressed against her skirts, watching, turning the child's face away. See, she had grouped Clara Marsh in her memory with all the others who had watched and done nothing. See, Clara Marsh had been doing something, just quietly. See, just in the only way that was safe for her. Tell her thank you, Eliza said. See, her voice came out steadier than she felt. Tell her I remember too. See, they rode to Fort Benton 11 days later, when a brief warm spell opened the lower trails enough to make it possible. See, Gideon on his big gray horse and Eliza on the smaller brown mare he kept for supply runs, both of them bundled to the eyes, riding in the white silence of a mountain winter that had briefly decided to rest. See, she had thought she might feel strange about it, about riding into a government office and making formal what had started as a desperate bargain in the dark. See, but she didn't feel strange. She felt practical, which was she was beginning to understand how she felt about most things when she let herself settle into them. See, the clerk at Fort Benton was a small, precise man named Harmon, who had done this enough times that he did it without drama or particular curiosity. See, he had them both sign the register and signed it himself as witness and gave them a copy on official paper and accepted the fee and said congratulations in the tone of a man for whom the word had become purely procedural. See, they walked out into the cold air with a piece of paper that said they were married legally on record, in a way that a Billings magistrate receiving Crowder's letters would be obliged to account for. See, Eliza folded the paper and put it in her coat pocket. See, Gideon looked at her on the street outside the clerk's office. See, the cold had put color in his scarred face. He looked, she thought, different in town, not uncomfortable exactly, but like something that had been calibrated for a different environment and was making adjustments. See, a mountain animal briefly at lower altitude. You hungry? He asked. See, extremely. They found a lunch counter near the fort and ate real food, not just real in the sense of being edible, but real in the sense of having been cooked by someone with time and resources she hadn't had in weeks. See, she ate with an earnestness that she didn't bother to perform dignity about, and he matched her without comment. See, halfway through the meal she said, "What was her name?" See, he looked up. "The woman who didn't stay," Eliza said. See, "You don't have to tell me, but I'd like to know." See, he was quiet for a moment. He ate a bite, set the fork down, looked at the table. See, Margaret, he said. She came up for one winter, thought she wanted what the mountain had. See, discovered she wanted what the town had more. He picked the fork back up. See, that's the whole story. Was it bad when she left? See, yes. He said it without performance, without reaching for anything. See, just the plain acknowledgement. For a while it was bad. He looked up at her. See, then it stopped being bad, and it was just something that had happened. See, she nodded. She understood that trajectory. She'd lived a version of it herself, more than once. See, I'm not Margaret, she said. I know that. I want to be sure you know it. See, he looked at her directly. Eliza. See, you shot a man who was trying to kill me, and then stood in the woodshed afterward and told him to his face you were staying. Something moved at the corner of his mouth, almost a smile, contained before it fully arrived. See, I'm not confused about who you are. She felt warmth in her face that had nothing to do with the food or the heated room. See, she looked at her plate. Eat your food, he said. See, she did. They rode back up the mountain in the late afternoon light, the paper folded in her pocket, and the cold settling back in around them as they climbed. See, She thought about Crowder down in Red Hollow, with his hired men and his letters to magistrates and his version of events that had her as property gone missing. See, she thought about the spring thaw that was still weeks away, but was coming as certainly as everything else came. See, she was not afraid of the spring. She noted this fact the way you note the absence of a pain you've been carrying so long you'd stopped registering it as unusual. See, she was not afraid. She was something else, not ready exactly, because nobody is ever exactly ready, but something adjacent to ready. See, something that had its feet under it. They were halfway up the mountain when Gideon stopped his horse and held up a hand, and she stopped hers beside him and listened. See, the forest was quiet in the particular way it goes quiet when something has moved through it recently. See, not natural quiet, disturbed quiet. He pointed left at the snow between two stands of trees. See, she looked. Hoof prints, 2 sets, heading upslope, maybe half a day old based on how the edges had blurred. See, not yours, she said quietly. No. He studied the direction they'd come from. See, not Aldous' either. Wrong shoes on the horse. Crowder's men. See, scouting, maybe. Or establishing a route. He didn't move for a long moment. See, early. Earlier than you expected, yes. She thought about the cabin. See, about the positions they'd discussed. See, about the stack of ammunition in the storage box and the angle of the door frame and the sight lines. Gideon had pointed out to her on a morning 3 weeks ago when she'd been half awake and thinking about other things and had paid attention anyway. See, because you paid attention to things that mattered. See, we need to move faster, she said. Yes, they moved faster. See, the cabin was undisturbed when they reached it. Nothing had been touched. See, but Gideon walked the perimeter twice, and she walked it once behind him, and they both saw what there was to see, boot prints in the snow on the north side, someone who had come close but not approached the door. See, standing still, looking, measuring. He's sending someone to look before he commits, Gideon said. See, wants to know what he's walking into. Then he knows we're here. See, he knew we were here. He looked at the boot prints. See, now he knows something else. What? He looked at her. See, that we're not scared enough to stay off the mountain for a day. See, she understood. They'd ridden down, done their business, ridden back up, and whoever had stood here watching the empty cabin had seen that they'd left and come back. See, that they weren't hiding, that they were living their life on this mountain, as though they intended to keep doing it. See, which they did. That night, Gideon took the table and moved it himself, not to the angle she'd put it, but to a new position she hadn't thought of, tighter to the wall and lower, better cover from 2 windows at once. See, he showed her why, and she looked at the angles and saw it immediately and filed it away. See, there's something we haven't talked about, she said, while he was repositioning one of the heavier supply boxes. See, a few things, he said without stopping. I mean, specifically, she sat on the edge of the bed. See, if he comes with enough men, enough that we can't hold the cabin, what's the plan? See, he set the box where he wanted it, straightened, looked at her. See, there isn't one, she waited. I won't leave this mountain, he said. See, it was not dramatic. It was just stated, the way you state something that's been decided so long it's no longer a decision. See, this is my home. I built it. I know every inch of it. See, if I run from it, I lose the only advantage I have. He met her eyes. See, if that's not something you can live with, tell me now. See, she held his gaze. I walked 3 days through a February storm to get to this mountain, she said. See, I'm not running from it either. Something in his face shifted. See, that recalibration again, the one she'd first seen when she'd shot Cutter's revolver out of his hand. See, the look of a man updating his information. All right, he said. See, all right, she said. She lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling, thinking. See, he went back to moving things, quiet and methodical. See, the fire did what fires do in mountain cabins in winter. It worked hard and imperfectly and kept the cold mostly at bay. See, Gideon. When did you know? She wasn't sure exactly what she was asking. See, it came out before she'd fully formed it. He stopped moving. See, know what? That this was going to be. She stopped. See, tried again. That it wasn't just a transaction. He was quiet for long enough, that she thought he might not answer. See, then he sat down in the chair near the fire and looked at the flames for a moment and said, "When you moved the table." See, she blinked. "The table? You'd been in this cabin one day." See, you moved the table because you saw a better angle and you just did it without asking permission. He looked at her then. See, I'd had that table in the wrong place for 3 years. See, hadn't noticed until you moved it. She didn't know what to say to that. See, so she said nothing, and it was the right call. See, and the fire burned, and the mountain held its cold silence outside, and the paper in her coat pocket, the one with the clerk's signature, and the date in Harmon's small, precise handwriting, was the most solid thing she'd possessed in years. See, the next morning, Gideon took her out before breakfast, past the tree line to the north, where the slope rose steeply and gave a view of the trail below. See, he showed her 3 things. A deadfall trap for slowing horses, not harming them, that he was going to build at the first bend. See, a blind he'd been planning in the rock outcrop that would give a firing position covering 60 yards of exposed approach. See, and a supply cache food, ammunition, 2 blankets buried under a specific rock formation that she needed to be able to find if they were ever separated. See, she memorized all of it, not because she was told to. See, because it was hers to know. "You're going to teach me to track too," she said on the way back. See, I was planning to, and to read the traps. Really read them, not just check them. See, yes. She walked beside him through the snow, her breath coming out in clouds, her frostbitten foot complaining in the cold the way it was going to complain for the rest of the winter, and possibly forever. See, she had stopped thinking of that foot as a wound. It was just information now. See, just something to account for. "I need you to stop pulling back," she said. See, he glanced at her. "When you're explaining something, and you think I've got enough of it," she said. See, you stop before you're done. "I need the whole thing, not the version you think I can handle." See, he was quiet for a step or two. "Noted," he said. "And I need you to tell me when something is wrong before you've already decided how to handle it." See, another pause. "That one's harder, I know." She looked at him. See, "Do it anyway." He met her eyes, held them. "You're not easy," he said, and it didn't sound like a complaint. See, "No," she agreed, "but I'm staying." He looked ahead at the cabin coming into view through the trees, solid and imperfect and built to last. See, "Yes," he said, "you are." They had breakfast and got on with the day. See, February was burning down. The snow was still deep and the cold was still mean, and Silas Crowder was still in Red Hollow with hired men and a grievance he had dressed up as principal. And there was still everything coming that was coming. See, but on the mountain, for now, it was just another morning. See, coffee going in the pot, rifle cleaned and loaded and in its place. See, 2 people who had chosen each other in the dark learning to choose each other again in the daylight, one ordinary difficult day at a time. See, the wildflower in the crack in the wall had not fallen. See, she had made sure of that. March came in the way it always did at that altitude, not gently, not with any of the softness that people in lower places associated with the arrival of spring, but grudgingly. See, like something being pulled backward through a door it didn't want to leave. See, the snow didn't melt so much as it shifted, settling deeper in the shadows, and pulling back from the south-facing slopes in thin patches that froze again every night and thawed again every afternoon. See, turning the ground into something unreliable underfoot. See, Eliza had been on the mountain for 6 weeks. She knew this not because she'd been counting with the anxious precision of someone waiting to leave, but because Gideon kept a notch calendar on the back of the storage box door, 1 cut for every day. See, grouped into 7s, and she had started adding her own notch in the morning before he woke, the way you absorb small rituals from people you live closely with. See, 6 weeks. It felt like more and like less simultaneously, which she had come to understand was what it felt like when a place became yours. See, time stopped running at its normal rate. She had changed in ways she was still cataloging. See, her hands had changed most visibly. The softness that had never been particularly soft to begin with was entirely gone now. See, she had calluses in places she hadn't had them before, along the rifle stock line on her right hand, across the palms from the trap chains, on the pads of her fingers from the harness work and the woodpile. See, she looked at her hands some mornings the way you look at a piece of work in progress, and tried to decide how she felt about them. See, she mostly felt fine about them. They were useful hands. See, they did what she needed them to do. Her shooting had improved past the point of adequacy and was approaching something Gideon called, in his particular economy of praise, reliable. See, she knew the Winchester the way she knew her own face, not perfectly, not without occasional surprises, but intimately enough to be trusted. See, she had also been working with the shotgun, which was a different and more forgiving instrument at close range, and which, Gideon had admitted, was probably the smarter choice for defending the cabin's interior, if it came to that. See, you're thinking about the doorway, he said one evening, watching her practice the transition between the two weapons, checking the feel of the movement. See, always thinking about the doorway, she said. He had built the deadfall trap at the first trail bend in the second week of March, working 2 full days in cold that made the tools stiff and her fingers ache even in gloves. See, she had helped. See, handing materials. See, holding pieces while he secured them. See, and learning as she went. See, the trap was designed to drop a section of heavy timber across the trail at a trigger point, not to kill horses or riders, but to create delay and noise and confusion, to announce an approach and slow it down. See, it was, she thought, a very Gideon solution to a problem. See, not dramatic, just effective. He had also built 2 firing blinds. See, the one in the rock outcrop to the north she'd known about since he showed her. See, the second one she discovered him constructing on the east side of the cabin one morning when she came back from checking the trap line alone for the first time. See, he dug into the snowbank and reinforced it with cut timber so it wouldn't collapse, and from inside it you had a protected angle on the south approach that the cabin's windows couldn't cover. See, she stood at the opening of it and looked out at the cleared ground. See, you didn't tell me about this one, she said. He was behind her, still working. See, I'm telling you now. You said you would tell me before you decided things. See, he stopped working. She heard him set down the tool. See, I started it before I said that, he said. I was going to tell you when it was worth telling. See, she considered that. It was a reasonable distinction and also a mild infraction of the thing she'd asked for, and she decided to let it live somewhere between those 2 categories. See, it's worth telling, she said. I'm here. Tell me. See, he did. He explained the angle and the cover and why this position worked in combination with the rock blind in a way that neither worked alone. See, so that 2 people could cover the full approach without either one being exposed for more than a moment at a time. See, she listened to all of it and asked 2 questions, and he answered them completely, which was what she'd asked for. See, good, she said. Good, he said, and went back to work. See, the thaw that mattered, the real one, the one that opened the lower trails and made the main route up the mountain passable for a group of riders came in the 3rd week of March, ahead of when either of them had privately expected it. See, Liza knew it was coming the morning she woke to the sound of water. See, not a lot of water, not a rush, just the thin persistent sound of snowmelt moving somewhere nearby, finding its level. See, she lay in the dark and listened to it and thought, there it is. See, she got up and dressed before Gideon woke and put the coffee on and stood at the window, watching the gray pre-dawn light show her a world that was, incrementally, giving ground to the season. See, she was still standing there when he came up behind her and looked past her at the window. See, heard it? She asked. Yes. They drank their coffee. See, how long, she said. Week. Maybe 10 days before the main trail is rideable for a group. He looked at the tree line. See, less if the weather holds warm. Then we assume a week. See, yes, she turned from the window. I want to go over everything again. See, every position, every fallback, the cache, all of it. See, all right, today, he said again, same tone. See, he was not a man who got impatient with preparation. See, she had come to love this about him, the way she'd come to love several things about him that she hadn't expected quietly, without announcement. See, as if the feelings arrived while she was doing something else, and simply unpacked themselves and got settled in without asking. See, she had not said this to him. It was too new and too large, and the timing was wrong in ways that she felt clearly, even if she couldn't articulate them precisely. See, you didn't tell a man you'd started to love him 3 days before an armed confrontation you weren't certain you'd survive. See, that felt like putting something fragile down in a place where it might get broken. See, she would tell him after. She held that thought like the Fort Benton paper in her pocket, solid, real, available when needed. See, they spent the day in full review. Every position walked, every angle confirmed, every piece of the plan spoken aloud, and questioned and adjusted where adjusting was warranted. See, she found 2 things she wanted changed, one in how they'd planned to signal each other between the rock blind and the cabin if one of them needed to reposition, and one in the placement of the secondary ammunition in the east blind. See, which she thought was too exposed to be accessed quickly under fire. See, Gideon listened to both and agreed with both, and they fixed both, and she felt the satisfaction of that, not of being right, but of being taken seriously in a situation where being right mattered. See, Aldous came up on the 4th day of the thaw. He looked tired in a way that was different from his usual weathered tiredness. See, he looked like a man who'd been watching something build for a while and was not enjoying the view. See, he's leaving tomorrow, Aldous said before he was fully through the door. See, Crowder, he's taking 5 men and he's coming up the mountain. See, the room went quiet except for the fire. 5, Gideon said. See, 5 that I counted. There may be more who didn't come through town openly. Aldous sat down heavily. See, he's calling it a lawful recovery. See, he's got a document. I don't know if it's legitimate or something he paid someone to produce, but he's walking around with official-looking paper and telling people he has legal authority to retrieve stolen property. See, Eliza's jaw tightened. He's going to show up here with a forged document and 5 guns and call it law. See, that's the shape of it. We have a registered marriage, Gideon said. See, from Fort Benton, a clerk's signature and a civil record. See, I know. I told him. Aldous stopped, corrected himself. See, I told someone who I believe told him. He said the registration was fraudulent. See, said you coerced her into it. He looked at Eliza. See, said she wasn't in her right mind. She breathed through her nose. See, steady. Of course he did. There's more. Aldous looked at the table. See, Clara Marsh sent word. She went to the territorial office in Billings 2 weeks ago. See, made a statement about what she saw on Main Street. See, what he did to you publicly. He paused. Crowder found out. See, her laundry burned 2 nights ago. The building. Everything. See, she and her daughter got out, but it's gone. Eliza's hand resting on the table went flat and still. See, is she safe? She asked. She's at her sister's place outside town. See, she's safe. Aldous looked up. But she's got nothing. See, and Crowder walked past the burned building the next morning and said it was a shame what careless people did with their stoves in winter. See, the fire in the hearth popped. Nobody spoke for a moment. See, Eliza thought about Clara Marsh standing in the lamplight on Main Street with her child's face pressed into her skirts. See, turning the child's face away but not her own, watching. See, remembering. Taking that memory all the way to Billings and sitting down in an official office and saying, on record, what she had seen, knowing what it might cost her. See, and it had cost her everything she'd built. She's going to need help when this is over, Eliza said. See, her voice was level. The levelness cost her something. See, yes, Aldous said, we'll figure that out when this is over. She looked at Gideon. See, he was watching her with that steady attention, the full weight of it on her face. See, tomorrow, she said. Tomorrow, he confirmed. Aldous stayed the night. See, there wasn't discussion about it, it was simply understood. See, he took the floor near the fire without complaint, having apparently done it before at some point, and Gideon gave him the extra furs without being asked. See, Eliza lay in the dark that night and did not sleep for a long time. See, she was not afraid in the way she'd been afraid of Silas in Red Hollow, the cold, passive fear of a person who has no options. See, this was different. This was the fear of a person who has options and understands exactly what using them will cost. See, A sharper thing, a more honest thing in its way. Beside her, Gideon was awake too. See, she knew his breathing when he slept, and it wasn't that. See, say something, she said, quietly enough not to wake Aldous. See, what do you want me to say? Anything true? He was quiet for a moment. See, I built this cabin the summer I came up here. It took 4 months because I was doing it alone, and I didn't know what I was doing. She heard him shift, settling. See, I tore out the east wall twice because I put it up wrong. See, the roof took me 3 weeks. I dropped a beam on myself and cracked 2 ribs and kept working because there was nobody to tell and nothing else to do. He paused. See, I thought about quitting every single day for the first 2 months. See, she listened. I didn't quit because I'd already decided this was where I was going to be, he said. See, not because I was certain it would work out, just because I'd decided. He let that sit. See, that's still how I operate. I know, she said. I'm the same way. See, I know you are. His hand found hers in the dark, under the furs. See, not grasping. Just there. That's why I'm not worried. See, she turned her hand over and held his, and stared at the dark ceiling and listened to the mountain outside, going about its ancient indifferent business, and eventually she slept. See, they came mid-morning. She heard the deadfall trap first, the crack and crash of the timber dropping, the startled horses, a man's voice raised in anger or surprise, and she was already moving before the sound finished. See, the Winchester in her hands and her position at the left side of the doorframe before Gideon had cleared the east side of the room. See, he went out the back. That was the plan. He took the east blind, which gave him the angle on the north and south approaches simultaneously. See, Aldous went to the west, around the exterior, moving low and fast for a man his age. The rifle Gideon had given him the previous evening, looked after and ready. See, Eliza held the doorway. She counted her breaths, in through the nose. See, out through the mouth. The cold air came through the gap where the door stood 2 inches open, and she used it, the sharpness of it, to stay precise. See, she heard them coming up the trail from the south, the horses moving carefully on the still, uncertain ground. See, she couldn't see the trail from her angle. She was inside, positioned for the clearing, for whatever would come into the open ground in front of the cabin. See, she waited. Silas Crowder rode into the clearing like a man who expected his arrival to resolve things. See, she saw him before he saw any resistance. He was on a dark horse, bigger than she'd remembered. Or maybe it was just the hat and the coat and the way he sat a saddle like he owned the ground under the horse. See, 2 men rode in behind him, and 2 more split off to flank left toward the tree line, right toward the woodshed. See, professional spacing. These weren't the hasty men he'd sent in the winter. See, these were people who had done this before. 5. Aldous had counted 5. See, she saw 5. Silas pulled up in the center of the clearing and looked at the cabin. See, his voice came out big and flat and carrying Rourke. See, I know you're in there. Come out and let's do this without anybody getting hurt more than they need to. See, silence from the cabin. She watched him through the gap. See, watched him assess the quiet. She saw something move behind his expression, not fear, not yet, but the adjustment of a man who expected a faster response and isn't getting one. See, I've got legal documentation, he called. I've got the authority of the territorial office. See, you're harboring a woman who's been committed to my care by legal process, and I'm here to. See, that woman. See, Gideon's voice came from the east. See, from inside the blind. See, not visible. See, disembodied by distance and angle. See, is my wife. See, registered civil marriage, Fort Benton, March 3rd, a pause. See, you want to discuss documents, we can do that, in a court. See, in Billings. With a judge, another pause, or you can get off my mountain. See, the 2 flanking riders had stopped when Gideon spoke. See, they couldn't place him. Eliza watched them trying to locate the voice and not managing it, which was the point of the blind. See, Silas turned his horse in a slow half-circle, scanning. See, he was trying to read the situation, and the situation wasn't giving him clean information, which she could see was costing him something. See, Silas Crowder was a man who operated on certainty. See, on the assurance that his presence was sufficient. See, up here, in front of a cabin that refused to cooperate with his expectations. He was having to work, and she could see he didn't like it. "See, Eliza," he called out. Different tone now. Almost reasonable. See, almost gentle. The tone she'd heard him use in Red Hollow when he was performing Patience for an audience. "See, Eliza, come out. Whatever he told you, whatever he made you sign, that's not a real marriage. See, you know that. Come out and we'll go home and nothing else has to happen here." See, she said nothing. She had imagined this moment, lying awake various nights over the past weeks. See, she'd wondered how she'd feel hearing his voice again in circumstances like these. See, whether the old fear would come back, whether the sound of him saying her name would do something to her she didn't want done. See, it didn't. It did something else entirely. It made her angry, but clearly, cleanly, without the paralysis that anger sometimes carried. See, she looked at him through the gap, and she felt the solidity of the Winchester in her hands, and she thought, "You burned Clara Marsh's livelihood and called it a careless stove. See, you dragged me through the street by my hair and called it concern. See, you have dressed every act of domination you've ever committed in the language of care and authority, and I am done being impressed by the language." See, she said nothing. She held her position. One of the flanking riders, the one who'd gone right toward the woodshed, had dismounted and was moving on foot, trying to angle around to the blind side of the cabin. See, he was moving quietly, or trying to, but the snow gave him away, the crunch of it under boots carrying farther than he'd calculated. See, Eliza tracked him through the gap as far as she could. See, then she lost him past the edge of her angle. She heard Aldis's rifle crack from the west side. See, not a hit, a warning shot, close enough to be unambiguous. See, the man on foot went flat in the snow and stayed there. See, Silas's horse shied at the shot. He brought it back under control with a roughness that told her something about how he was feeling. See, "That's it," he said, and the performed Patience was gone entirely now, stripped off by the shot like paint off a hot surface. See, he turned to the riders behind him. "Burn it." She heard the word and felt it hit her differently than she expected. See, not panic, something colder. She had known this was a possibility, had discussed it with Gideon, had planned around it, but hearing him say it out loud in the thin mountain air, burn it, like the cabin was nothing. See, like the 7 years of Gideon's life built into these walls was nothing, like she was nothing worth more than a burned building. See, the rider on the left pulled something from his coat. See, a bottle. Rag stuffed in the neck. She pushed the door open. See, Crowder. Her voice came out even. She had not planned what she was going to say. See, she was operating past the plan now, in the territory beyond planning where you go on instinct and character and whatever you've built yourself into over the preceding weeks and years. See, Silas turned. He saw her standing in the open doorway with the Winchester, and his expression went through several things quickly. See, surprise, recalculation, and then, because he was who he was, a return to control or the performance of it. See, Eliza. He made her name sound like a conclusion. See, put that down. Tell your man to put the bottle down. See, tell yours to put the rifle down. He meant Aldis, still somewhere on the west side. See, and Rourke, wherever he's hiding, tell him to come out in the open. See, we can talk like adults. We are talking like adults, she said. See, this is what adults look like when one of them has burned another woman's home and called it an accident. She kept the rifle level. See, you are not taking me anywhere, Silas. You are not burning this cabin. See, you are going to turn those horses around and ride back down this mountain. See, he looked at her for a long moment. The calculation was back. See, she could see it, the way you see machinery working behind glass. See, you can't hold us all, he said, even with Rourke out there somewhere, and whoever that is on the west side. See, you're 2 or 3 people, and I've got 5. You've got 5 people who don't know exactly where we are, she said. See, we know exactly where you are, all 5 of you. She paused. See, that's a different kind of arithmetic. Something crossed his face. See, not quite doubt. Something adjacent to doubt in a man who almost never got close enough to it to recognize the territory. See, his eyes moved to the woodshed, to the tree line, to the rock outcrop trying to find Gideon and not finding him. See, the rider with the bottle had not moved. He was holding it, looking at Silas, waiting for a signal one way or the other. See, last time I count to 3, Gideon's voice said, from somewhere that seemed like it had moved. See, he was good at that, she'd learned. Moving through the blind system, using the terrain, making himself seem like more than one person in the landscape. See, after 3, I'm going to assume the bottle is going to be used, and I'm going to act accordingly. See, 1. The rider with the bottle looked at the bottle and then at Silas. See, 2. Silas raised his hand toward the rider, not a signal to go ahead, a hold signal. See, pause. Wait. His eyes were scanning and still not finding. See, put it away, Silas said to the rider, tight voice. See, controlled. The rider tucked the bottle back into his coat. See, silence across the clearing, 6 horses breathing vapor into the cold air. See, somewhere in the trees, something shifted a branch, releasing its snow load, dropping it with a muffled sound, and 2 of the riders flinched and turned toward it, which told her everything about the quality of their nerves. See, Silas looked at her, just at her, like they were the only 2 people on the mountain. See, this isn't over, he said. No, she agreed, it isn't. See, but today it is. She held his gaze and didn't blink and didn't lower the rifle. See, take your men and go. He sat on his horse in the middle of the clearing for a long moment that she felt in her chest like a held breath. See, then he turned the horse. He said something to his men, too low to catch, and they began to move the one who'd gone flat in the snow getting up slowly, the flanking riders coming back in. See, all of them assembling themselves into a group with the particular purposeful awkwardness of men retreating and trying not to look like it. See, Silas rode out last. At the edge of the clearing he stopped and looked back. See, just looked. She met it straight on, rifle still up, and she didn't fill the silence with anything because she didn't need to. See, he rode into the trees and was gone. Eliza stood in the doorway and listened to the horses moving downslope, the sound getting smaller until it blended with the mountain's general noise and then disappeared into it. See, she lowered the Winchester. Her arms were shaking. See, not badly. See, not visibly. See, but she felt it in the muscles. See, the release of held tension. See, she leaned against the doorframe and breathed and let the shaking run its course, the way she'd learned to let it. See, Gideon came around the corner of the cabin from the east. See, he was moving fast, and then he saw her standing and slowed. See, he looked at her face and at the rifle and at the empty clearing. See, you went outside the plan, he said. Yes. You stood in the open. See, yes. He looked at the tree line where Crowder's men had gone. See, did it work? They left. She pushed off the doorframe. See, her legs were steadier than she expected. Come inside. See, I need coffee. Aldous came around the west side, rifle on his shoulder, moving with the careful stiffness of a man who'd been crouched too long in cold. See, he looked at the clearing and then at both of them and let out a breath that had probably been held for 20 minutes. See, well, he said, well, Eliza said, they went inside. See, she put the coffee on. Her hands were steadier than they'd been after the first time she noticed. See, progress. Or maybe just different, not less shaken but more accustomed to the shaking, which was not the same thing, but served some of the same functions. See, Gideon sat at the table and said nothing for a while, which was his processing mode, and she'd learned not to interrupt it. See, Aldous sat across from him and also said nothing, which suggested he'd spent enough time around Gideon to have learned the same thing. See, she set 3 cups down and poured. He'll be back, Gideon said eventually. See, I know. What you said to him about the arithmetic. See, about us knowing where they were, he wrapped his hands around the cup. See, you bought us time. Made him uncertain enough to pull back. He looked up at her. See, good thinking. She sat down. He's going to go back to Red Hollow, and he's going to be furious, and he's going to start planning again. See, yes, Gideon drank, but he's also going to go back down that mountain, having not gotten what he came for. See, and his men watched him pull back when a woman in a doorway told him to. He set the cup down. See, that matters. Men like Crowder, their power is built on everyone believing it's absolute. See, The minute it isn't absolute, it starts unraveling, Aldous said. See, he was nodding slowly. I've seen it before. Not often. See, but I've seen it. He looked at Eliza. What you did just now, stepping out there, saying what you said. See, people are going to hear about it. His men are going to talk, she said. See, his men were already reconsidering the job before they turned the horses around. See, hired men don't like uncertain situations. They like clear odds. He drank his coffee. See, those odds didn't look clear today. She thought about Crowder riding down the mountain. See, about the shape of him on the horse, the straight back and the hard jaw and the eyes that had looked at her one last time at the edge of the clearing. See, she had expected triumph, and instead she felt something more tired than that. See, not sadness exactly, just the weight of understanding that this was not finished and might not be finished for a long time, and that the shape of the fight had changed today, but the fight itself hadn't ended. See, Clara Marsh, she said, we need to think about her. See, both men looked at her. When this is over, when Crowder doesn't have the leverage he has right now, she needs to be able to come back. See, she needs help rebuilding. She looked at Gideon. Can we do that? See, we can do some of it, he said. Between us, there are people in Red Hollow who'd help if they weren't scared. See, fewer of them are going to be scared after today. See, Aldous was quiet for a moment. Then I'll put in. See, and I know a few others who've been waiting to see which way this was going to break. He looked at Eliza. See, you're going to have friends in that town before long. See, people don't forget a woman who stands in a doorway and tells Silas Crowder to go home. See, she shook her head slowly. I didn't do it to make friends. See, I know, Aldous said. That's why it'll work. Outside, the March light was doing what March light does at that elevation, when it's honest, cold, and clear and promising nothing, just illuminating what's there. See, the snow in the clearing showed the churned marks of 6 horses and the boot prints of a man who'd gone flat and gotten up again and ridden away. See, by tomorrow the wind would have softened all of it, and by the week after it would be gone entirely, the way all the specific evidence of specific moments eventually goes, leaving only the general altered shape of things behind. See, she took her coffee and went to the window and looked out at the clearing and the tree line and the mountain rising past it into the kind of sky that looked like it went on forever. See, her mountain, their mountain, built board by board and chosen day by day and defended by 2 people who had found each other in the worst possible circumstances and had, against reasonable expectation, built something that was worth defending. See, she had stood in that doorway, not because the plan called for it. See, she had stood there because she had decided, somewhere in the long cold weeks on this mountain, that she was done being something that happened to other people. See, done being the woman running, the woman hiding, the woman hoping someone else would make the situation tenable. See, she had made it tenable. She had stood in the open and looked Silas Crowder in the face and told him the arithmetic, and he had calculated and found his odds wanting, and he had ridden away. See, he would come back. But he had ridden away today, and today was the only day she was living in. See, Gideon came and stood beside her at the window. She didn't look at him, and he didn't look at her. See, they both looked at the clearing and the trees and the mountain. See, after, she said quietly, so Aldous, dozing in the chair near the fire, wouldn't hear. See, after what? He said. When it's actually over, when Crowder is dealt with properly for good. She kept looking at the window. See, I have something to tell you. She felt him look at her then. See, she didn't turn. All right, he said, just that, patient. See, certain. She leaned slightly against his arm. He let her. See, the mountain outside was indifferent and enormous and cold and entirely, completely theirs. See, Crowder came back 11 days later, not at mid-morning this time. See, he came at first light, which told her he'd learned something from the first attempt, that coming in the full day gave the defenders too much time to read his approach, too much light to work with. See, first light was smarter. First light meant cold, stiff hands and eyes that hadn't fully adjusted, and the particular vulnerability of people dragged from sleep into crisis. See, it was a better plan than the last one. He had also brought more men. See, She heard the deadfall trap at the first bend, the same crack and crash as before, but this time followed immediately by a second sound. Someone else's horse shying, and a man's voice cursing in the gray dawn. And she understood from that second sound that they'd come in two groups, staggered, anticipating the trap and sending someone ahead to trigger it deliberately so the main body could come through clean. They were learning too. That was the thing about Silas Crowder that she had understood intellectually, but now understood in her bones. He was not stupid. He was a brutal man, a domineering man, a man who had arranged the world around himself for so long that he had lost the ability to understand why anyone would refuse to be arranged, but he was not stupid. And she had made a mistake somewhere in the past 11 days of thinking that the first failed approach might discourage him into something manageable. She was dressed and at the doorframe before the second sound finished. The Winchester was in her hands. Behind her, she heard Gideon moving, the specific sounds of him that she could now read like language, the particular way he pulled on his coat, the sound of shells going into his coat pocket. Two groups, she said, without turning. They triggered the trap on purpose. I heard. He was close behind her. How many? Can't tell yet. At least two at the trap. More coming. He moved past her to the east wall, checked the window. Getting light fast. She looked out the door gap at the clearing. Empty still. Dawn coming up gray and thin over the eastern ridge, the kind of light that shows you shapes before it shows you details. The snow in the clearing was unmarked. They hadn't breached the tree line yet. They're waiting for more light, she said, or waiting for the second group to circle around. He came back from the window. They're going to try to come from two sides simultaneously this time. The trap didn't stop them. It just slowed the lead group. She had already thought of this. Aldous isn't here. No. He said it flat and clean, without anything attached to it, because adding something to it wouldn't change the fact. Aldous had gone down 3 days ago with a leg that had been giving him trouble since February, an old injury that the cold and the tension had aggravated past the point of ignoring, and he wasn't coming back up in time for this. It was two of them against however many Crowder had brought this time. She heard movement in the trees to the south, then, a few seconds later, movement to the northwest. Two directions, as Gideon had said. She pressed herself against the left side of the doorframe and did what he had taught her to do, breathed, calculated, prioritized. You can't cover everything. You cover what matters most and accept that the rest is the rest. I take the south, she said. You take the northwest blind. That leaves the east side open. I know. But if they're splitting into two groups, the east is the hardest approach. The slope is steep, and the snow is still deep on that side. They'd need to commit serious resources to it, and if they're already splitting two ways, they can't afford a third. He looked at her for a moment in the thin dawn light. Go, she said. He went. She heard the back door open and close, and then she was alone in the cabin, and the clearing outside was still empty, and the sounds in the trees were getting less careful, the way sounds get when people shift from waiting to moving. And she steadied herself against the door frame and waited. They came out of the south tree line first. 4 men, spread wide, moving fast across the clearing toward the cabin. They were armed and not hiding it, and they moved with the purposeful spread of men who'd been told to create a wide enough target that a single defender couldn't cover all of them at once. Smart. She recognized the tactic and noted it and fired at the rightmost man because he was the one with the clearest angle to flank the doorway if he got close enough. She hit him in the shoulder. He went down hard and stayed down. The other 3 broke their spread instinctively the way people do when something they didn't account for happens, and in the 2 seconds of that break, she worked the lever and repositioned and fired again. And the second shot went wide because one of them had done something unexpected, dropped and rolled in the snow rather than scattering sideways, and she hadn't led for it. From the northwest came the crack of the shotgun once. Then again, the second barrel. Then the sounds of Gideon reloading, she could hear it in the pattern of what followed, the brief pause, and then the Winchester from the blind, which meant he'd transitioned weapons. Which meant whatever he was dealing with on the northwest side was at closer range than the shotgun had handled cleanly. She did not look toward the northwest. She could not afford to look toward the northwest. She had the south clearing and 3 remaining men, and she had to hold that until one situation or the other resolved. The man on the ground to the right was not moving. Down for the duration. The 3 standing had taken cover, one behind the water trough. Gideon had built on the south side of the clearing, 30 feet from the cabin door, one at the corner of the woodshed. One in a shallow depression in the snow that gave him barely enough concealment to feel safe, which meant he wasn't thinking clearly. She took the one in the depression because he was the most exposed and the most likely to do something panicked, and she had learned in the weeks of preparation that had preceded this morning, that panicked men in open ground were a specific kind of danger that needed addressing before they became unpredictable. She fired. He rolled. She fired again. He stopped rolling. The one at the woodshed corner pulled back out of sight. The one behind the water trough fired at the doorway, and the shot hit the door frame 18 inches above her head, and she dropped to a knee and fired back and knew she'd missed because she'd moved too fast. And she pressed herself flat against the inside wall and breathed and made herself slow down. You're rushing. She heard Gideon's voice in her head from a freezing morning 2 months ago when she'd set a trap wrong. You'll be cold and wrong. She made herself slow down. The man behind the water trough fired again. Lower this time. Getting her range. She couldn't stay flat against the wall indefinitely. She needed to move, but moving meant exposure, and she needed to time it to something. She heard Gideon's voice in the clearing to the northwest. Not words a shout, the kind that happens when 2 people are close to each other and moving. Then a single rifle shot that was not from his rifle, from someone else's, and then a sound she felt in her sternum rather than heard with her ears, and then Gideon's Winchester again, 2 fast shots, and then silence from the northwest. The man behind the water trough was looking toward the northwest sound. She took the quarter second that his attention was divided and came up from the floor and fired. The shot took him in the side, and he fell backward over the trough and didn't come up. She was on her feet and through the door before she made the decision to do it, crossing the porch in 2 steps and going low and keeping the cleared ground between her and the woodshed corner where the last man had pulled back. She hit the corner of the cabin with her back against the logs and held. Silence from both directions. She heard footsteps in the snow on the northwest side of the cabin, and she brought the rifle up, and then Gideon came around the corner, and she dropped it. He was moving. That was the first thing she checked, that he was on his feet and moving under his own power. He was. But there was blood on the left side of his coat, a dark patch spreading from somewhere below the shoulder, and his left arm was carrying wrong, hanging a few inches lower than it should. He hit, she said. Not a question. Through and through, he said. I think. You think, mostly think. He looked at the woodshed. One more. Woodshed corner. He pulled back, hasn't shown again. He moved past her, not fast, not the way he normally moved, but steady, and she stayed at the cabin corner, covering the woodshed from the south while he came at it from the west. And they worked it the way they'd talked about, working exactly this kind of problem 3 weeks ago in the quiet of the cabin. And when the last hired man saw 2 angles coming at him, instead of one, he did what people do when the math stops working in their favor. He put his hands up. He was young. She hadn't expected that. 20, maybe 22, with red-rimmed eyes and a thin beard and a face that in other circumstances would have looked like a face you'd see doing ordinary things in an ordinary town. He held his hands up in the cold dawn light of the clearing and looked at Gideon's rifle, and then at hers, and then at the dark patch on Gideon's coat, and she saw him understanding what he was looking at. Where is Crowder? Gideon said. The young man's hands were shaking. He held back. At the trail, he said he'd come up when he stopped. See. When what? Eliza said, when it was clear. She and Gideon looked at each other over the young man's head. See. Silas Crowder had sent his hired men up the mountain first. See. He had held back and waited for them to open the situation and then intended to walk into the cleared result. See. He had, she understood in one clean moment of clarity, never intended to be in the fight. See. He had intended to arrive after the fight when it was convenient and safe. See. He had sent those men up and waited at the trail. She handed the Winchester to Gideon. See. He took it with his good arm, without questioning why she was giving it to him. See. Keep him here, she said. Eliza, keep him here. She looked at Gideon directly, making sure he saw her eyes and that her eyes said what her words were not going to elaborate on. See, I'm going to get Crowder off this mountain myself. See, she didn't wait for his agreement. She went to the south trail and she walked down it, through the churned snow where the hired men had come up, through the place where the deadfall trap had sprung and was lying in pieces across the path. See, down through the trees where the light was still thin and gray, and the cold was still the mean cold of early morning. See, she found Silas Crowder at the first bend below the trap. See, he was on his horse, and he had 2 men with him, not hired guns. These 2, the kind of men he kept close for personal protection, which was a different category than the men he'd sent up the mountain. See, these 2 watched her come out of the trees and reached for their weapons, and Silas held up a hand, and they stopped. See, he looked at her. See, she was walking down a mountain trail in the early morning with no weapon visible and blood on her sleeve that may or may not have been hers, and she was looking at him the way she had looked at him from the doorway the first time and the way she had. See, looked at him from the porch the previous time, and whatever he saw in that look, it was apparently something that gave him enough pause to hold his men. See, it's done, she said. She stopped 10 feet from his horse. See, your men are down or gone or sitting in a clearing with their hands up. See, Gideon is still standing. I am still standing. She let that be there for a moment. See, it's done, Silas. He looked past her up the trail. See, calculating. Still always calculating. I've got 2 men here, he said. See, I know. And whatever you send up this mountain, we will meet, she said. See, every time. Until you run out of men or money or the will to keep doing this. She met his eyes and didn't look away. See, you burned Clara Marsh's building. You sent hired men twice. See, you've spent how many months, how much money trying to drag me back to something I said no to. She shook her head. See, what is that worth to you, Silas? Really, what is it actually worth? See, he was quiet. The horse shifted under him, impatient with standing still in cold air. See, it's not about you, see, she said, and she meant it plainly. See, not as an insult. See, you know it's not about me. It never was. It's about the fact that I said no and people saw me say it and saw me walk away, and you haven't been able to make that not have happened. She paused. See, but it happened, and sending more men up that mountain doesn't unhappen it. See, it just makes it worse for you every time. Something moved in his face. See, not softness. She didn't expect softness from him, and she didn't see it. See, but something. A man who has run a long calculation and is arriving, for the first time, at a result he didn't anticipate. See, you think you've won something, he said. I think I've kept what was mine, she said. See, that's all I ever wanted. He looked at her for a long moment in the gray morning light, and she looked back. See, and the 2 men on either side of him looked at the ground or the trees or anywhere that wasn't this confrontation between their employer and the woman he'd been unable to either retrieve or ruin. See, then Silas Crowder did something she had not predicted and would spend a long time afterward trying to fully understand. See, he reached into his coat and pulled out the document, the one Aldous had mentioned, the official-looking paper he'd been carrying around red hollow, claiming legal authority over her, and he looked at it for a moment. See, then he held it out sideways and let it drop into the snow on the side of the trail. See, he didn't say anything. He turned his horse. Tell Rourke, he said without looking back, that I'll expect no further interference in my business in Red Hollow. See, and we'll expect the same from you, she said. He rode down the mountain. See, his 2 men followed. She stood at the trail bend and watched them until she couldn't hear the horses anymore, and then she stood a while longer because she needed the moment to be real before she did anything else with it. See, the document was half buried in the snow at the trail's edge. See, she picked it up and looked at it. See, it was, as she'd suspected, not an official territorial document at all, something produced by a local notary who had presumably been well paid, with language that sounded authoritative and seals that looked real from a distance. See, she folded it and put it in her coat pocket next to the Fort Benton paper, the legal one, the real one. See, she climbed back up the mountain. See, Gideon's wound was through and through, as he'd said. See, but the through and through had done enough damage that she spent the better part of the morning dealing with it in a way that required everything she'd learned from 3 years of helping frighten people through. See, difficult things before she'd ever come to this mountain. See, she cleaned it properly completely without flinching at what she found, using the medical supplies Gideon kept in the storage box with the same organizational logic he applied to everything else. See, she packed and bound it and told him clearly, and without softening, what the risk of infection was and what she was going to watch for and what he needed to do, which was mostly not use that arm and not be difficult about it. See, he was somewhat difficult about it. She had expected this. See, I need to check the blinds, he said while she was still binding the wound. See, no, the east blind had some structural damage from. See, it can wait if the weather turns before I get to it. See, Gideon. She tied off the bandage with more firmness than strictly necessary. See, you have a hole in you. The blinds will stand for 1 day. She looked up at him. See, the young man is still in the clearing. He had, in the chaos of the wound care, apparently forgotten about the young man. See, right, she dealt with the young hired man herself. See, he had not run, which surprised her slightly. He'd had opportunity and hadn't taken it. See, and when she came back out to the clearing, she found him sitting on the porch steps, looking at the grass to the ground, with the specific expression of a person who has fully grasped the size of what they've gotten themselves into. See, she looked at the clearing, 2 men down, wounded but alive, the cold having cooperated in slowing their bleeding. See, the man she'd shot first in the shoulder was conscious and looking at her with pain and weariness. See, the one who'd gone down to her second shot was less coherent but breathing. See, the men Gideon had dealt with on the northwest side she found in 2 positions, one seated against the cabin wall, holding his side, one flat in the snow, who turned out, on examination, to be unconscious rather than dead. See, 5 men who had come up the mountain to burn the cabin and drag her away by legal fiction. See, none of them dead. She took stock of this fact and felt something complicated about it that she didn't fully parse until later. See, she told the young man on the porch steps to help her. See, he did. They got the wounded men into the woodshed, which had become at this point a sort of recurring field hospital for people who'd made poor decisions about Rourke Ridge. See, she bound what needed binding and did what she could for the one who was unconscious and left them all with the young man sitting guard over them. See, which was a slightly absurd arrangement given that she was the one doing the guarding, but she needed hands and he was available. See, what's your name? She asked him while she worked. See, Declan, he said. How old are you, Declan? A pause. See, 21. She looked at him. How long have you been doing this kind of work? See, about 6 months. Before worked on a ranch. See, down near Miles City. He looked at the men on the floor. See, ranch folded. Crowder was paying 3 times what anyone else offered. See, she thought about that for a moment, a ranch that folded. See, a young man with no other options looking at wages that seemed like a solution. See, she didn't say what she was thinking because it wasn't the time for it, but she filed it away. See, when they can ride, she said, you take them down the mountain. See, you tell anyone who asks that Silas Crowder rode away before the shooting stopped. She looked at Declan steadily. See, you make sure that gets around. He looked at her. See, something moved in his young face, understanding maybe of why that particular message mattered. See, yes, ma'am, he said. She went back inside to Gideon. See, he was at the table where she'd left him. which was the one thing she'd insisted on, and he'd complied with. See, he had used the time to clean the Winchester one-handed, which was, she decided, after looking at it, probably not medically ideal, but also probably not going to kill him, so she let it go. See, she sat across from him. He dropped his document, she said. See, in the snow, and rode away. Gideon looked at her. See, dropped it. Deliberately, without a word about it. She put the folded paper on the table between them. See, and he told me to tell you he expects no interference in his Red Hollow business. See, Gideon was quiet for a moment, and you said that we'd expect the same courtesy. See, he looked at the paper. You think he means it? She considered the question honestly. See, I think he calculated and found this line of effort too expensive, she said. See, I think men like Silas don't stop wanting what they wanted. See, but I think there's a point where the cost of pursuing it becomes something even they can't rationalize. She paused. See, he spent months and significant money and sent men up this mountain twice, and both times they came back having failed in front of each other. See, the last time he waited at the trail while his own hired men took the risk. See, that got back to them. I made sure of it through Declan. She looked at Gideon. See, his authority in Red Hollow is built on the idea that he's formidable. See, that nobody defies him without consequence. But now there's a consequence he's eating. Not delivering. She shook her head. See, I don't think he'll be back. I think we cost him more than we're worth. See, Gideon absorbed this. He nodded once slowly. There's a word for what you just did, he said. See, she raised an eyebrow. You didn't just stop him from burning the cabin, he said. See, you stopped him from being able to pretend he won. See, you gave that young man a specific message to carry back down. He looked at her. See, you understood that what he needed to lose wasn't just the fight. See, it was the story. She hadn't articulated it to herself in quite those words, but hearing them, she recognized they were right. See, you can win a fight and still lose everything if the story says otherwise, she said. See, he's been telling a story about me for months. I needed to give Red Hollow a different story to tell. See, Eliza Rourke, he said, not with particular emphasis. See, just saying the name, like he was placing it correctly in the world. See, she felt that in her chest. Not the name she'd been answering to it since Fort Benton, but the way he said it. See, the quality of it. I told you I had something to tell you, she said. See, after. You said all right, I remember. See, she looked at him across the table in the gray morning light coming through the cabin window, with the bandage on his shoulder and the cleaned Winchester between them and the burned-down remnants of the morning's fire in the hearth. See, she looked at him the way you look at someone you have chosen so many times in so many specific moments that the choosing has become indistinguishable from the person you are. See, I love you, she said. I don't say it to put something on you. See, I say it because it's true, and you deserve to know true things about your situation. See, he looked at her for a long moment. His face did what his face did, something internal and real and not performed for any audience. See, I know, he said. You know, I've known for a while. He held her gaze. See, I was waiting for you to know you were going to say it. See, she shook her head slowly. That's an extremely annoying thing to say. See, yes, he agreed. I love you too, she laughed. Briefly, unexpectedly, the kind of laugh that comes out before you've decided to laugh. The kind that belongs to moments when something that has been held very tightly lets go all at once. See, she pressed her hand to her mouth, and the laugh ran its course, and she felt her eyes go hot, and she did not cry, which she considered a personal success given the morning's general inventory. See, he reached across the table with his good hand, and she took it, and they sat that way for a while without talking, which was, she had long since understood, one of his primary expressions of everything that mattered. See, spring came properly in April. See, not the grudging intermission of March, but real spring, insistent and muddy and inconvenient, turning the trails to soup and filling the creek that ran a quarter-mile east of the cabin to a rushing, chocolate-brown urgency. See, the mountain changed color not all at once, but in patches, brown emerging from white, then the first cautious green appearing in the south-facing hollows where the sun hit longest. See, the cabin changed too. They repaired what the confrontation had damaged, and there was damage. Less than might have been given what had happened, but real, a section of north wall where a shot had gone through a gap in the logs and required packing. See, a window shutter cracked by impact, the woodshed door that had been left open in the cold and had warped badly enough to need rehanging. See, Gideon directed most of this one-handed for the first 2 weeks while the shoulder healed. See, which meant Eliza did most of the actual physical work while he offered technical commentary that was occasionally useful and occasionally something she told him flatly to keep to himself. See, he kept it to himself. Mostly, the packing on the north wall is uneven, he said one afternoon. See, I know. The left section is going to work loose before winter. See, I said I know. If you take out the Gideon, she turned and looked at him. See, if you would like to come over here and redo this with one working arm, please be my guest. See, he closed his mouth. She finished the packing. It was uneven. See, it would hold. Aldous came back up in mid-April with his leg improved and a load of supplies and news from Red Hollow that he delivered in pieces over the course of 2 days. See, the way he always delivered news not as drama but as information, organized by what mattered most. See, what mattered most was this. Silas Crowder's 2 remaining hired men had left his employ within a week of coming down the mountain. See, they had, according to Aldous, gone without being paid what they were owed, and had not made a loud complaint about this, which said something about what the alternative to leaving had looked like. See, 2 of the men Eliza had wounded had passed through Red Hollow on the way to wherever they were going next, and they had talked, and what they had talked about had moved through the town in the way things move through small places fast. See, embellished slightly at the edges, but essentially accurate at the core. See, Silas Crowder had waited at the trail while his men fought. See, that was the story. That was the one that spread. And in a town built on the foundation of one man's projected authority, that story did what such stories do. See, it didn't destroy him overnight. It didn't send him fleeing. See, but it changed the atmosphere, the way people stood near him in conversation. See, the way they answered his questions, slightly slower, slightly more measured. See, the invisible social architecture of deference that had been the air he breathed in, Red Hollow for a decade, shifted, incrementally. See, in the way that things shift when the single fact they were organized around turns out to be less solid than everyone believed. See, Crawford stopped sweeping his porch. When Crowder walked by, Aldous said as one example. See, just stopped and looked at him. Didn't say anything. See, just looked. He drank his coffee. Crawford hasn't done that in 12 years. See, Eliza thought about old Crawford and his porch, and the night she'd run past him with Silas's hand in her hair. See, she felt something settle in her that had been slightly unsettled since that night. See, and Clara Marsh, she asked. Aldous' expression shifted into something more careful. See, she's still at her sister's. He paused. She needs help. See, real help. The building was everything she had. We said we'd help with that, Eliza said. See, I know. I've got a list. He produced it from his coat, an actual written list, which was so characteristically Aldous that she almost smiled. See, there are 4 people in town who'll contribute money without Crowder knowing. See, 2 who'll contribute labor. I can add to that from the supply post. I'll take it as a business expense, which it is in a way, since Clara took her laundry work to me when she could. He set the list on the table. See, it's not enough to rebuild everything, but it's enough to start. See, Gideon looked at the list. I'll put in timber. I've got more than I need from the clearing work this winter. He looked at Eliza. See, and I know a man in Fort Benton who can document the fire as arson if there's a witness willing to say what they saw. See, that creates a legal claim against Crowder's property. See, Declan, Eliza said immediately. Both men looked at her. See, the young one. He was there when Crowder said to burn the cabin. See, he heard it directly. She looked at Gideon. He's not working for Crowder anymore. I made sure of that before he left. See, he went back to Miles City. She paused. If someone found him and asked whether he'd be willing to make a statement, he might say yes. See, Aldous was already writing something down. They spent another hour on the logistics of Clara Marsh's rebuilding. See, it was not a conversation Eliza had ever expected to have from a mountain cabin in Montana, the practical mechanics of pulling apart one man's authority and redirecting resources to the people he'd hurt, but she sat in it fully and contributed. See, specifically, and felt it as a continuation of what she'd started that March morning when she'd walked down the trail to find Silas Crowder waiting at the bend. See, winning the fight was one thing, this was the other thing. See, the slower, more difficult thing that didn't get named in the stories people told, but mattered more in the long run. See, by summer, Eliza Rourke had a reputation in Red Hollow that had been built entirely by other people and was, for once in her life, accurate. See, she had not gone back to the town. She hadn't needed to. See, the story of Rourke Ridge told and retold and sent along the supply routes and the gossip lines that connected every frontier community to every other had traveled without her. See, the woman who'd crossed a killing winter, who'd held a doorway while hired men burned. See, who'd walked down a mountain alone and sent Silas Crowder home. See, she knew what stories did when they traveled. They simplified. See, they lost the cold mornings and the shaking hands and the conversations that went wrong before they went right, and the specific, ugly, unglamorous work of building something real out of nothing. See, stories kept the dramatic moments, because those were what people could hold on to, and she didn't resent this. See, she just knew the distance between the story and the actual thing. See, the actual thing was, see, she had a cracked porch step that needed replacing and a rifle that needed a new sight and a husband who expressed love primarily through anticipating what she needed before she said it and occasionally through driving her to distraction by. See, commenting on her patchwork when his arm was too injured to do it himself. See, the actual thing was good. It was better than good. See, it was the best thing she had ever been part of building. See, Clara Marsh came up the mountain in June. She came with Aldous, who'd offered to bring her when it became clear she wanted to come and wasn't going to stop wanting it. See, she was a small woman, dark-haired, somewhere in her mid-30s, with her daughter beside her, a girl of about 8 who looked at everything with the focused attention of a child who has learned that paying attention is useful. See, Liza saw them come through the tree line and went out to meet them. See, Clara stopped at the edge of the clearing and looked at the cabin and at Eliza, and then at the mountain rising behind the cabin, and then back at Eliza. See, I wanted to thank you, she said, in person, not through Aldous. See, you don't need to thank me, Eliza said. You went to Billings. See, that took more courage than I had on most of those nights. See, Clara shook her head. What I did cost me a building. See, what you did stopped him from doing it to anyone else. See, the building fund Eliza started is generous, and I'm grateful for it. Clara's voice was steady. See, but that's not why I came. She looked at Eliza with the directness of a woman who has had things taken from her and has decided the taking is finished. See, I came because I wanted to see what this looked like. See, a woman who didn't let him win. I needed to see that it was real. See, Eliza thought about the night she'd stood on Main Street, watching faces watch her and do nothing. See, about turning the child's face away but not her own. See, about the specific courage of witnessing when witnessing is all you can safely do and carrying it all the way to a government office in Billings. See, it's real, Eliza said. Come inside. Clara's daughter, whose name was Nora, immediately began a thorough examination of the cabin that Gideon accepted with the gravity of a man being inspected by a general. See, she looked at the wildflower in the crack in the wall and asked what it was for, and Gideon said it was there when he got here, and he'd never moved it, which Eliza suspected was only partially true, but was somehow exactly the right answer for Nora. See, they had lunch together, all of them. See, Aldous and Clara and Nora and Gideon and Eliza around the table that had been moved to the wrong angle 3 times, and was now, finally, in the position Eliza had put it in the first full day she'd been in the cabin. See, the food was plain, and there wasn't quite enough bread, and Gideon's shoulder made him slower to serve than usual, and Nora knocked her cup over, and the conversation went in 6 directions at once. See, it was, Eliza thought, the best lunch she had ever eaten. See, the first snow of the following season came in early October. See, not the killing kind. The preliminary kind a few inches overnight, gone by noon, a reminder from the mountain of what was coming, and an invitation to be ready. See, she woke to white light through the window and lay still for a moment, listening to it. The specific quality of silence that snow brings, even when you're inside looking at it. See, she got up without waking Gideon, which she could do now with reasonable consistency, and put the coffee on and went out onto the porch. See, the world was white and new, and the sky was the pale gray of early morning, and the mountain above the cabin rose into cloud in a way that made it seem infinite. See, the clearing was untouched, the trail was covered. See, the deadfall trap at the first bend had been rebuilt in the spring and sat somewhere below in the trees, patient and invisible, doing the work that good preparation does by simply existing. See, she stood on the porch in the cold and drank her coffee and looked at all of it. See, she thought about a February night and a door and two choices that were really only one choice if you were the person she actually was underneath all the running. See, she thought about a bargain made in the dark that had started as survival and become something she didn't have a word large enough for. See, she thought about the woman she had been when she'd walked through that door, desperate, frostbitten, out of everything except stubbornness, and she tried to locate the distance between that woman and this one. See, she couldn't find the seam. That was the thing. She was still that woman, completely. See, she had not become someone else. See, she had become more of herself. See, which was different. See, and harder to explain. See, and mattered more than transformation. See, the door opened behind her. Gideon came out with his own cup, his coat pulled on over his shirt, his breath making a cloud in the cold air. See, he stood beside her, and they looked out at the new snow together in the particular silence that people share when they have lived long enough in the same space to stop needing to fill silences. See, early, she said. About the snow. Little bit. He drank his coffee. See, not bad. She leaned against him. He was warm through the coat, solid, real in the way only things you have chosen repeatedly become real. Not perfect, not uncomplicated. See, not without the full weight of who he was and wasn't, and the history she didn't know all of, and might never know all of. See, real the way a place is real when you've decided it's home. See, she thought about Silas Crowder in Red Hollow. She'd heard through Aldous that he was still there, still in business, still the largest single employer in town, still a man people were careful around. See, but careful differently now. The way you're careful around something whose teeth have been shown to have limits. See, he had not attempted anything against them since March. See, he had not, as far as anyone could tell, attempted anything against Clara Marsh or anyone associated with them. See, he was smaller than he had been, not by disaster, but by the quiet subtraction of people who stopped pretending his authority was absolute. See, she didn't feel triumphant about this. She had thought she might, and she didn't. See, what she felt was something quieter and more durable, the particular satisfaction of a person who has set something right, not through victory, but through refusal. See, through the simple, sustained refusal to be what someone else needed her to be. See, some battles don't end. They just lose the energy to continue. See, I need to retile the northeast corner of the roof before it snows properly, Gideon said beside her. See, I know. The second course is buckling. I saw it. See, I'll need you to hold the I know, she said. See, we'll do it today. He was quiet for a moment. You already measured it. See, 3 days ago. She felt him look at her without turning to look back. See, felt him looking with that attention that was one of the things she'd cataloged early and had never finished appreciating. See, she thought about what she'd said to him on the porch in March, leaning against his arm. See, I have something to tell you after. See, and after had come and she'd told him, and he'd said he knew, and she'd laughed and cried slightly, and told him that was the most annoying possible response, and he had not apologized for it, and that had been exactly right. See, behind them, through the cabin walls, the fire she'd built before coming outside was burning steadily. See, she could feel it faintly, the warmth of it against the cold that pressed in from all other directions. See, the same fire she had nearly died trying to reach, 7 months and a whole different life ago. See, I'm not afraid of this one, she said, meaning the winter. See, I know, he said. Last year I was afraid of it. Even after everything, I was still carrying it around. See, the cold, what it felt like out there. She looked at the mountain. See, I'm not carrying that anymore. He said nothing, which was the right thing. See, she stood on the porch of the cabin she had walked into as a stranger and had repaired and defended and made her own through the specific work of choosing it every day. See, beside the man who had offered her the most improbable bargain of her life and had kept every part of it, and she watched the first snow of the season settle into the clearing and felt, see, for the first time in a life that had given her very few reasons to feel it, like something that had always been running, had finally, fully stopped. See, not because the world had become safe. It hadn't. Not because the hard things were over. See, they weren't. But because she had stopped measuring her life by the threats it contained and started measuring it by the ground beneath her feet, which was solid, and the fire behind her, which was burning, and the man beside her, who was real, see, and the mountain around all of them, which did not care about any of it and was magnificent anyway. See, the snow fell. The coffee was hot. The roof needed work. See, it was, she thought, looking out at all of it with her whole heart steadily in her chest, more than enough.